Hello guys, welcome to Percy Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was the demigod son of Ares, his rage fueled by both the Kyuubi and the god of war. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Blood Price. The air in the Forest of Death was a thick, humid thing, tasting of damp earth, rot, and the metallic tang of fear. It clung to the skin, a second layer of grime and sweat that Naruto had long since stopped noticing. Sounds were distorted here, the drip of water from a broadleaf sounding like a footstep, the rustle of a canopy snake like the whisper of an enemy. For most of the genin hopefuls, this was a place of terror, the 44th training ground, the final, brutal filter of the academy. For Naruto, it was quiet. The chaos of the forest was a soothing balm compared to the constant, grating noise of Konoha's glares and whispers. His team, what passed for one, was a study in dysfunction. Sasuke Uchiha, the last loyalist of a dead clan, sat with his back against a gnarled root. Eyes closed but every muscle coiled tight, radiating an aura of impatient disdain. Sakura Haruno was a nervous wreck, her eyes darting towards every shadow, her hands getting with the handle of a kunai she didn't know how to use. She was trying to project an image of calm for Sasuke's benefit, a futile effort that only amplified the tension. Naruto stood watch, his posture relaxed but his senses straining against the oppressive humidity. He wasn't listening with his ears so much as feeling the vibrations in the air, the subtle shifts in pressure that signaled movement. It was an instinct, a primal awareness that had nothing to do with the rudimentary tracking skills Iruka-sensei had tried to drill into them. The forest breathed, and he breathed with it. Quote, "Are you sure this is a good spot to rest?" Sakura's voice was a strained whisper, sharp enough to cut through the low thrum of cicadas. Sasuke didn't open his eyes. "It's as good as any. We have the scroll, we just need to make it to the tower." His arrogance was a shield, thick and polished, but Naruto could feel the hairline cracks in it. He was on edge, too. He just hid it better. "But what if someone finds us?" Sakura pressed, her gaze flicking nervously towards Naruto, as if he were another one of the forest's dangers. "Let them try," Sasuke murmured, a smirk touching his lips. Naruto almost scoffed. It was a foolish sentiment. An invitation. War wasn't about daring your enemy to find you, it was about ensuring they never got the chance. He shifted his weight, the worn fabric of his orange jumpsuit, a relic of a past self he barely recognized, making a soft, abrasive sound. He needed to get new gear. Black, maybe, or a dark gray, something that didn't scream, "Here I am, please throw sharp things at me." That was when he felt it. A tremor in the web of the world. 3 signatures, moving fast, closing in with the coordinated grace of a predator pack. They were loud, arrogant. They weren't trying to be stealthy. They were broadcasting their approach. "A dominance play, company," Naruto said, his voice flat. He didn't turn to face his teammates. His eyes were fixed on the dense wall of foliage to the north. Sasuke's eyes snapped open, his hand instantly going to the pouch on his hip. Sakura gasped, scrambling to her feet. "Where?" "There." Naruto pointed. 3 of them, overconfident. They think they have the element of surprise. Before Sasuke could formulate a retort, a blur of motion erupted from the trees. A boy with wild brown hair, red fang markings on his cheeks, and a small white dog perched on his head landed in the clearing, a predatory grin plastered across his face. Kiba Inuzuka. Flanking him were his own teammates, a quiet, hooded boy whose FACE was obscured by a high collar and dark glasses, and a girl with soft, lavender eyes that held a flicker of apprehension. Shino Aburame and Hinata Hyuga. Well, what do we have here?" Kiba crowed, his voice dripping with condescension. He hopped from foot to foot, radiating a restless, aggressive energy. His dog, Akamaru, let out a sharp yip that echoed his master's arrogance. The dead last, the pretty boy Uchiha, and his useless fangirl. "Hand over your scroll, and we might not rough you up too much." Sasuke rose to his feet, a dark fire in his eyes. "You're making a mistake, dog breath." "Am I?" Kiba laughed, a harsh, barking sound. He took a step forward, his eyes locking onto Naruto. The grin on his face tightened into a sneer. I heard you failed the graduation exam 3 times. Surprised they even let you in here. Don't they have standards? Or are they just so desperate for bodies they'll take anyone? Even a worthless, no-name orphan. The world didn't just go silent. It ceased to exist. The chirping insects, the humid air, the very ground beneath his feet, it all vanished, replaced by a singular, deafening roar in his ears. It was the sound of 1,000 shields splintering, of 1,000,000 war cries echoing across a blood-soaked field. It was the song of his blood, ancient and terrible. A coppery heat flooded his veins, sharp and intoxicating. It wasn't the familiar, volcanic rage of the Kyuubi's chakra, the one that felt like being burned from the inside out. This was different. It was cold, clear, and focused. It was the fury of a master smith at his forge, every strike precise. Every movement imbued with lethal purpose. The orange of his jumpsuit seemed to dim, swallowed by an imperceptible shadow as a faint, shimmering aura, the color of freshly spilled blood, bled from his skin. It didn't billow or churn like the Kyuubi's cloak. It clung to him, a razor-thin corona of power that made the air around him taste of ozone and iron. Kiba saw the shift. The confident smirk on his face faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then anger. He mistook the change for a Jinchuriki's tantrum. What's wrong, orphan? Gonna cry. He lowered himself into a 4-limbed stance. His chakra flaring. Man-beast clone. He and Akamaru spun into a matched pair of cyclones, twin drills of fang and claw that ripped through the air, aimed directly at Naruto. It was a taijutsu technique meant to overwhelm and shred. To Naruto, it was moving in slow motion. The spinning forms were a chaotic mess of wasted energy, a flurry of openings. He didn't dodge. He moved forward, stepping into the eye of the storm. His left hand shot out, not as a block, but as a wedge. He didn't aim for Kiba's claws. He aimed for the wrist joint. His fingers, reinforced with a chakra that was as much divine essence as it was shinobi energy, clamped down like a vice. There was a sickening crunch of bone and cartilage. Kiba's spin unraveled instantly, his triumphant war CR. Turning into a strangled shriek of agony. The world snapped back into real time. Naruto didn't release the broken wrist. He used it as a lever, yanking Kiba off balance and pivoting on his heel. His other hand, balled into a fist that felt as dense as stone, drove upward in a brutally efficient arc. It connected under Kiba's jaw with a crack that echoed through the clearing. Kiba's head snapped back, his eyes rolling up into his skull as consciousness fled. He was out before he hit the ground. Akamaru, his transformation broken, flew past, yelping in confusion and pain for his master. The little dog landed and spun around. Hackles raised, teeth bared in a desperate, grief-stricken snarl. Naruto turned to face the dog. His eyes, no longer the bright cerulean of a summer sky, were a deep, chilling crimson. Not the slit-pupilled eyes of the fox, but the solid, burning red of a forge's heart. There was no anger in them. Only a terrifying, absolute calm. The calm of a predator that has already secured its kill. He took a step towards Akamaru. The dog, sensing a threat that transcended anything it had ever known, whimpered and backed away, its bravado completely shattered. Enough. The voice was soft, but it cut through the charged atmosphere. Hinata had moved, stepping between Naruto and the terrified puppy. Her arms were spread wide, a shield of her own body. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and resolve. She was trembling, but she held her ground. Naruto stopped. His crimson gaze fell upon her, and for a moment, the predatory stillness remained. He looked through her, not at her. He saw the trembling hands, the rapid pulse in her throat, the sheer, unadulterated terror in her eyes. And yet, she stood her ground. For a dog, it was illogical, it was inefficient, it was brave. The coppery aura around him flickered, then receded, sinking back into his skin. The crimson in his eyes faded, leaving behind the familiar blue, though it was now shadowed and cold. The roar in his blood subsided to a low hum. He looked down at the unconscious Kiba, at his mangled wrist, and then back at the trembling girl and the cowering dog. He felt no remorse, no satisfaction. The threat had been neutralized. That was all. He is no longer a threat, Naruto stated, his voice raspy. He turned away, his attention already shifting. Shino Aburame hadn't moved an inch. But Naruto could feel the swarm of Kikaichu insects under his jacket buzzing with agitation. A silent, waiting threat. Sasuke stared, his Sharingan, not yet active, but the potential for it a burning coal behind his eyes, trying to process what he had just seen. That wasn't the dead last. That wasn't the clumsy, loud-mouthed idiot from the academy. The sheer, brutal economy of motion. The cold precision of the strikes. It was a level of taijutsu he had never witnessed before. It was artless, yet perfect. There were no wasted movements, no flourishes. Just pure, unadulterated combat efficiency. He had felt the power. Too. A chakra that was sharp and heavy, like a guillotine's blade. It made his own skin crawl. Sakura was frozen, her hand clamped over her mouth, a choked sob caught in her throat. She was looking at Naruto as if he'd just shed his skin and revealed a monster underneath. In her mind, that's exactly what had happened. The tension was broken by the arrival of a new presence. A flicker of movement in the trees, and a man landed silently in the center of the clearing. He had gravity-defying silver hair, a mask covering the lower half of his face, and a kono. A forehead protector slanted over his left eye. His single visible eye, dark and lazy, took in the scene with a placid, almost bored expression. But beneath the surface, a storm of calculations was raging. Kakashi Hatake. He looked at Kiba's unconscious form, the unnaturally bent wrist, and then at Naruto, who stood with his back to the scene, as if it were already ancient history. He saw the terror on Sakura's face, the shocked calculation in Sasuke's. Finally, his gaze lingered on Hinata, who was still shielding the whimpering Akamaru. "Well," Kakashi said, his voice deceptively cheerful. "Looks like the kids are having fun." The Hokage's office was a place of quiet history. The walls were lined with books and scrolls, the air thick with the smell of old paper and pipe tobacco. Sunlight, HT streamed through the large window overlooking the village, illuminating the countless motes of dust dancing in the air. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the third Hokage, sat behind his desk, his aged face a mask of weary contemplation. The crystal ball on his desk was dark, the flames of his pipe long since extinguished. Across from him stood Naruto. He hadn't bothered to clean the dirt and grime from his sea. Loths are the streak of dried blood, Kiba's blood, on his cheek. He stood at ease, his posture relaxed, a stark contrast to the coiled tension Hiruzen usually saw in shinobi, even seasoned jonin, who were called into his presence. Iruka stood by the door, his arm in a sling from a minor injury sustained during the Mizuki incident the night before. His face was a mixture of concern and a deep, unsettling fear. He kept glancing at Naruto, searching the boy's face for any sign of the monster he believed lurked within, but finding only a calm, unreadable blue gaze. "Tell me what happened, Naruto," Hiruzen said, his voice soft, yet carrying the undeniable weight of command. "Team 8 ambushed us," Naruto began, his tone even and matter of fact. "Kiba Inuzuka led the assault. He was overconfident and created multiple openings. He chose to verbally taunt me, which I identified as an attempt to provoke an emotional response. I engaged him." "You engaged him?" Iruka cut in, his voice sharp with disbelief. "You shattered his wrist and knocked him unconscious in under 3 seconds, Naruto. Anko's team had to carry him to the hospital. They said the break was surgical. Deliberate." Naruto turned his head slightly to look at Iruka. "Yes, a clean break to the radius and ulna. It disables his hand, preventing him from forming hand seals or using his clan's taijutsu effectively. It's a temporary but decisive neutralization of his combat ability." He spoke as if describing a mechanical process, devoid of any emotion. Hiruzen steepled his fingers, his old eyes fixed on the boy. This was the part that worried him. It wasn't the violence. He was the leader of a village of assassins, violence was their trade. It was the cold, terrifying logic behind it. "Did you feel you were in danger, Naruto?" "All shinobi are in danger during this test," Naruto replied. "That is its purpose." Kiba presented himself as a direct, immediate threat to me and my team's objective. I eliminated the threat. You could have subdued him without crippling him, Iruka argued, taking a step forward. You could have used a clone, a transformation, anything. Those methods are inefficient, Naruto countered, his voice remaining level. They create opportunities for an enemy to regroup and counter. A decisive, overwhelming strike conserves chakra and minimizes risk. His verbal provocations were a tactical error on his part. He revealed an emotional vulnerability I could exploit. It made him predictable. Hiruzen held up a hand, silencing Iruka. He leaned forward, his gaze intensifying. Naruto, I want you to describe the feeling. The power you used, was it the 9 tails? Naruto paused, his eyes unfocusing for a moment as he looked inward. He had felt the fox's rage before. It was a searing, chaotic inferno that wanted to burn the world to ash. This was not that. This was different. No, he said finally. The fox is loud. A storm. This is quiet. It's a fire, but it doesn't burn. It forges. It makes everything clear. The world slows down. I can see the lines of attack, the weaknesses in a stance, the exact point on a bone that will fracture under pressure. He looked back at Hiruzen, his blue eyes holding a flicker of something ancient. It feels like a song about battle, and when I listen to it, I feel calm. I feel like myself. A heavy silence descended upon the room. Iruka stared, utterly speechless. Hiruzen leaned back in his chair, a deep sigh escaping his lips. The smoke from his cold pipe seemed to form phantoms in the air. War is in your blood. He had said those words to the boy just last night, a half-conscious premonition. Now, hearing Naruto describe the intoxicating clarity of combat, the song of battle, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft from the window. He had suspected it for years. The boy's resilience, his impossible stamina, a certain primal intensity that the villagers mistook for demonic influence. He had always attributed it to the Kyuubi. A convenient, if terrifying, explanation. But he knew the truth was far more complex. Minato had never spoken of the boy's mother, only that she was powerful, from a distant land. And that her lineage was complicated. He had left a single, sealed scroll for Hiruzen, to be opened only if the boy's nature ever revealed itself in a way the Kyuubi could not explain. Hiruzen had a dreadful feeling that the time to unseal that scroll was rapidly approaching. There are forces that will take an interest in a power like yours, Naruto, the Hokage said, his voice grave. People who will see it not as a gift, but as a threat to be controlled or eliminated. You must learn to temper this instinct. To know when a battle must be fought, and when it is wiser to walk away. Why would you ever walk away from a fight you can win? Naruto asked, not with arrogance, but with genuine confusion. It was a strategic question. Hiruzen's gaze softened with a profound sadness. Because some victories cost more than they are worth. That is a lesson that takes a lifetime to learn. He gestured to the door. You are dismissed. Your new Jonin instructor will meet you at the academy tomorrow morning. Do not be late. Naruto gave a short, respectful bow and turned, walking out of the office without another word. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Iruka and the Hokage in the suffocating silence. Lord Third, Iruka began, his voice trembling slightly. What is he? Hiruzen picked up his pipe, his hands looking impossibly old. He didn't answer for a long time. He is a child of Konoha. He said finally, the words feeling like a lie even as he spoke them. He looked towards his crystal ball, but he wasn't seeing the village. He was seeing shadows gathering on a distant horizon. Shadows that had nothing to do with the Akatsuki or the other shinobi nations. Ancient shadows. As Naruto left the Hokage Tower, he was met with the usual glares. The whispers followed him like a cloud of insects. Demon. Monster. The words had lost their sting long ago. They were just noise, meaningless data. But today, there was a new flavor to the fear in their eyes. It wasn't just the Kyuubi they saw. It was the memory of Kiba Inuzuka being carried away on a stretcher, a silent testament to a different kind of monster. He ignored them all, his path straight and true. He had training to do. The song of battle was quiet now, a low hum beneath his skin. But he knew it was there, waiting. And he knew, with an instinct that was as certain as the rising sun, that there would be many more fights to come. Naruto's apartment was less a home and more a barracks. It consisted of a single, sparsely furnished room with an adjoining bathroom. There was a bed, neatly made with military precision, a small table with one chair, and a compact kitchen unit that looked barely used. The walls were bare, save for a large, hand-drawn chart of human anatomy pinned to one wall. covered in red ink marks indicating vital points, nerve clusters, and structural weaknesses. There were no pictures, no mementos, no clutter. It was the living space of someone who saw home not as a place of comfort, but as a forward operating base. A place to rearm, refuel, and prepare for the next engagement. He moved through the space with an ingrained economy of motion. He stripped off the hideous orange jumpsuit, bundling it and stuffing it deep into a trash bin. He would burn it later. A cold shower washed away the sweat and grime of the forest, the water sluicing over a body that was a roadmap of lean, corded muscle. He was lean, but there was a density to his frame that spoke of a power that was not entirely human. Dressed in a simple black t-shirt and dark gray pants, he began his nightly ritual. It wasn't the standard shinobi kata or stretching exercises. It was something else, something his body knew on a cellular level. He moved through a series of forms that were both brutal and beautiful. A dance of death that flowed from one lethal motion to the next. One moment, he was practicing a shield-breaking charge, his shoulder lowered, his body a living battering ram. The next, he was miming the thrust of a spear, a strike aimed at piercing a heart or a throat. He spun, his legs scything through the air in a sweeping kick designed to shatter a kneecap and drop a charging opponent. His hands would alternate between clenched fists for crushing blows and rigid, spear-like fingers for piercing vital points. He had never been taught these movements. They came to him in dreams. In flashes of instinct during a spar, whispers from the blood that flowed in his veins. He was a son of the god of war, and the art of battle was his birthright. A knock at the door broke his concentration. It was late. No one ever came to his apartment. His senses flared, the low hum of his power sharpening to a fine point. He didn't approach the door. He moved to the side, pressing his back against the wall. His body hidden from the peephole. Naruto, are you in there? It's me, Mizuki-sensei. Mizuki. The name registered with a cold click. One of his academy instructors. He won with the false smile and the eyes that never quite matched it. Naruto's instincts screamed, liar, traitor, threat. He stayed silent, listening. Naruto, I know you're in there. Mizuki's voice came again, laced with a syrupy, feigned concern. I heard what happened in the forest. I also heard what they said about the graduation exam. I know you passed, but Iruka, well, he's always been hard on you. He doesn't see your potential. Naruto remained still, his breathing slow and even. This was a classic manipulation tactic. Isolate the target, create a common enemy, and offer a secret path to validation. It was clumsy, insulting. I know a way you can prove him wrong, Mizuki continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. A secret, a final test. For special cases, like you. If you pass this, they'll have to make you a genin, maybe even a chunin, on the spot. Interested? A cold smile touched Naruto's lips. A trap, a poorly constructed one, but a trap nonetheless. Walking into it knowingly was the best way to turn it on its architect. He moved to the door and slid it open, composing his face into a mask of cautious hope, a caricature of the lonely orphan the village thought him to be. A secret test? He asked, pitching his voice to sound eager and a little desperate. Mizuki's smile widened. He had taken the bait. That's right. All you have to do is retrieve something for me. A little errand, to test your infiltration skills. He leaned in, the scent of his cloying sweat filling the air. In the Hokage's office, there is a large scroll. The forbidden scroll of seals. Bring it to the old cabin in the woods to the north of the village. Meet me there at midnight. Do this, and you'll show everyone what you're really made of. Naruto widened his eyes, adding a flicker of awe. The forbidden scroll, really? The one and only, Mizuki confirmed, patting him on the shoulder. The touch felt like a spider crawling on his skin. Don't tell anyone. It's a secret, remember. I won't, Naruto promised, his expression one of pure, unadulterated devotion. As Mizuki walked away, his back straight with the pride of a successful manipulator, Naruto's smile dissolved. He closed the door, the lock clicking into place with a sound of finality. He looked at the clock on the wall. He had a few hours. He wouldn't just spring the trap. He would rearm it, add his own lethal modifications, and ensure that when Mizuki stepped into it, there would be nothing left but the screaming. The Hokage Tower was quiet, a sleeping giant in the heart of the village. Naruto moved through its shadowed halls like a ghost. He didn't use stealth jutsu, he didn't need to. He moved with the innate silence of a predator, his steps perfectly placed, his presence a void in the building's ambient energy. The few guards on duty looked right through the spaces he occupied, their senses simply failing to register him. He found the Hokage's private library with ease. The lock was complex, but locks were merely physical puzzles, and his mind, a demigod's mind, saw the solution instantly. A thin, chakra-infused wire slipped into the mechanism, and with a series of deft twists, the tumblers fell into place with a soft snick. The forbidden scroll was massive, as tall as he was, and heavy with the weight of its deadly secrets. He unrolled the first few feet of it on the floor, his eyes scanning the dense, intricate script. For a normal person, deciphering even one of these jutsu would take weeks. For Naruto, it was like reading a familiar language. His brain absorbed the information with unnatural speed, dissecting the theory, the hand seals, the chakra mechanics, and the strategic applications in seconds. Taju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Multiple shadow clone technique. He saw it not as a simple ninjutsu, but as a force multiplier. An army at his command. A way to be in 100 places at once, to gather intelligence, to set ambushes, to overwhelm any opponent through sheer insurmountable numbers. It was a general's technique. A king's technique. He committed it to memory in under a minute, the knowledge settling into his mind as if it had always been there. He rolled the scroll back up, hefted it onto his back, and slipped out of the tower as easily as he had entered. He didn't run to the meeting point. He took his time, making his way to the designated cabin with a steady, unhurried pace. He was the one in control. The predator never rushes towards the prey. It lets the prey come to it. He arrived at the clearing and found Iruka waiting for him, his face a mask of betrayal and fury. "Naruto, what do you think you're doing?" Iruka yelled, his voice echoing in the silent woods. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Naruto calmly lowered the scroll to the ground. He had anticipated Iruka's arrival. Mizuki would have made sure of it, setting his former colleague up to be the scapegoat or the first victim. "Mizuki-sensei told me it was a secret graduation test," Naruto said, his voice level. "Mizuki?" Iruka's eyes widened in dawning horror. "Naruto, Mizuki tricked you. He's a traitor. He used you to steal the forbidden scroll for himself." Naruto's expression didn't change. "I know." The simple, two-word statement hung in the air, heavier than any kunai. Iruka stared, confused. You know, he's not very subtle," Naruto said with a shrug. His deception was obvious, but his plan had a useful component. It delivered the forbidden scroll to me and drew a traitor out into the open. It seemed efficient. Before Iruka could respond, a volley of kunai sliced through the air, aimed directly at him. Naruto moved in a blur, tackling Iruka and pushing him to the ground as the steel blades thudded into the tree behind them. Mizuki landed on a thick branch overhead, a cruel, triumphant smirk on his face. "Clever little demon," he sneered. "But it doesn't matter if you figured it out. You're both going to die here, and I'll take the scroll. I'll be hailed as a hero in the village hidden in the rain for delivering Konoha's greatest secrets." "Mizuki, you traitor," Iruka yelled, scrambling to his feet. "You're a fool, Iruka," Mizuki spat, his face twisting with long simmering resentment. "Always defending that thing. Do you know why the village hates him? Why they'll never accept him? I'll tell you the secret that everyone but him knows." He paused for dramatic effect, savoring the moment. The fourth Hokage didn't kill the nine-tailed fox. He couldn't. He sealed it inside a newborn baby. That baby was you, Naruto. You were the demon fox. Mizuki laughed, a wild, unhinged sound, expecting Naruto to break, to cry, to fall into despair. He expected the monster to lash out in blind rage. He was disappointed. Naruto slowly rose to his feet, dusting himself off. He looked up at Mizuki, and for the second time in as many days, his eyes bled from blue to a solid, smoldering crimson. A faint, coppery aura shimmered around him, making the air crackle. "I know what I am," Naruto said, his voice a low, dangerous growl that seemed to vibrate in Mizuki's very bones. "The question is, do you know what you're facing?" Mizuki's laughter died in his throat. This wasn't the reaction he'd planned for. The boy wasn't breaking. He was transforming. The chakra radiating from him wasn't the chaotic, wild energy of a Jinchuriki losing control. It was focused, disciplined, and utterly terrifying. It doesn't matter, Mizuki roared, trying to regain control. He pulled a massive shuriken from his back. Die, demon, he hurled it, the weapon spinning through the air like a buzzsaw. Naruto didn't move, he simply brought his hands together in a single, fluid seal. Taju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. The clearing erupted, not with a puff of smoke and a dozen clumsy clones, but with a silent, instantaneous explosion of solid forms. 1,000 Naruto Uzumakis snapped into existence, a perfectly formed legion that filled every inch of the forest floor and packed the branches of the surrounding trees. They didn't shout or posture. They stood in disciplined ranks, a silent army of 1,000. Their crimson eyes all fixed on Mizuki with the same cold, predatory focus. Mizuki froze on his branch, the giant shuriken forgotten as it sailed harmlessly past its target. His face went pale, his bravado evaporating into sheer, primal terror. This was impossible. No genin, no chunin, not even most jonin could create this many solid clones and remain standing. The original Naruto stood in the center of his army, a commander reviewing his troops. He raised a single hand. "He is yours," he commanded, his voice calm and clear. The legion moved as one. It was not a chaotic mob. It was a wave of disciplined destruction. Clones swarmed up the tree Mizuki was on, their movements coordinated. A team of 50 laid down suppressing fire with a perfectly timed volley of kunai, forcing Mizuki to abandon his perch. He landed on the ground and was immediately met by a phalanx of clones, their fists and feet a blur of motion. They didn't just punch and kick. They executed flanking maneuvers, feints, and coordinated takedowns. One squad would engage him from the front, while another would attack his legs from the side, and a third would drop from the trees above. Mizuki was a chunin, skilled and experienced. But he was one man against a disciplined army. He was overwhelmed in seconds. Naruto walked through the battle, his clones parting before him like water. He watched as Mizuki was disarmed, his joints systematically targeted and disabled. They weren't trying to kill him. They were dismantling him, piece by piece. Finally, they pinned him to the ground, his arms and legs held fast by a dozen clones. He was breathing in ragged, panicked gasps, his eyes wide with terror. Naruto stood over him, looking down with an expression of cold disappointment. "You are weak, Mizuki," Naruto said, his voice devoid of heat. "You mistake cruelty for strength and betrayal for cunning. You are not a warrior. You are just a traitor." He drew back his fist. The coppery aura around him condensed, flowing down his arm and gathering in his knuckles until his hand seemed to glow with a dull, crimson light. He didn't aim for Mizuki's head. That would be too quick, too merciful. He struck Mizuki's sternum. The sound was not a punch. It was a detonation. A sickening crack echoed through the forest as the traitor's chest cavity imploded. Mizuki let out a single, wet scream that as cut short as the air was violently forced from his lungs. He didn't die. He was left a broken, twitching mess, alive but shattered. The 1,000 clones vanished in puffs of smoke, leaving only the original Naruto standing over the moaning form of his former teacher. The crimson faded from his eyes, the battle song in his blood quieting once more. He turned to Iruka, who was staring, his face pale and his mouth agape. He had seen the Kyuubi's power before. This was not it. This was something else. Something ancient, disciplined, and terrifyingly powerful. He had just witnessed not a brawl, but an execution. A tactical annihilation. Naruto walked over to his injured sensei, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. He offered a hand. "You're hurt, Iruka-sensei." Iruka flinched at his approach before catching himself. He looked at the outstretched hand, then at the boy's face. He didn't see a demon. He saw a soldier, a warrior born. Hesitantly, he took the offered hand and allowed Naruto to pull him to his feet. At that moment, the clearing was filled with the silent arrival of the Anbu Black Ops, their porcelain masks impassive and cold. And with them, the third Hokage. Hiruzen's old eyes took in the scene. The massive scroll, the groaning, shattered form of Mizuki, the injured Iruka, and the unnervingly calm child at the center of it all. He walked forward, his gaze fixed on Naruto. He stopped before the boy and, without a word, removed the goggles from Naruto's head, replacing them with his own forehead protector. He tied the knot himself, his old fingers surprisingly nimble. As he finished, he looked deep into Naruto's blue eyes. "Your path will be a difficult one, child," Hiruzen said, his voice a low, somber murmur that only Naruto could hear. "War is in your blood." Naruto felt the cool metal of the leaf symbol press against his forehead. It felt right. It felt like a soldier's helm, a mark of his purpose. He looked past the Hokage, past the faceless Anbu, and into the dark. Waiting forest. He could feel the world, vast and filled with conflict, waiting for him. The song in his blood was quiet, but it was not gone. It was waiting, too. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Unforgiving Forge. The academy classroom felt smaller than Naruto remembered. The air was the same. Chalk dust, nervous sweat, and the faint, cloying scent of cheap cleaning supplies, but the dimensions had somehow shrunk overnight. Or maybe he had simply outgrown it. He sat in his usual spot in the back row, a silent observer in a sea of chattering, anxious genin. His W forehead protector was cool against his skin, a solid, tangible proof of the previous night's bloody transaction. It wasn't a prize. It was a piece of equipment. Whispers followed him, as they always did. But now they were tinged with a new kind of fear. The story of Mizuki's defeat had spread through the village like wildfire, twisted and exaggerated with every telling. They said he had summoned 1,000 demons. They said he had torn a Jonin apart with his bare hands. They said the monster had finally shown its true face. Let them. Their fear was a better deterrent than their scorn had ever been. He scanned the room, not looking for friends, but assessing assets. Kiba was absent, recovering in the hospital. A predictable outcome. Shino Aburame sat statue still, a silent, buzzing call. UMN of chakra that Naruto found intriguing. A living hive, potentially useful for infiltration and intelligence gathering. Hinata Hyuga sat near him, her posture rigid with a tension that seemed to radiate from her very soul. She kept stealing glances at him, not with the revulsion of the others, but with a wide-eyed, terrified awe. An interesting variable. She had stood against him for the sake of an animal. Illogical, but it demonstrated a capacity for courage that transcended self-preservation. A rare quality. Then there was his team. Team 7. He had heard the assignments being read out by Iruka, who pointedly avoided his gaze. Sasuke Uchiha, seated 2 rows ahead, was a perfectly still lake of dark, simmering chakra. He projected an aura of bored superiority, but Naruto could feel the truth of him. A tightly wound spring of rage and ambition, honed to a razor's edge. A potent weapon, if it could be aimed correctly. And then Sakura Haruno. Her chakra was a frantic, fluttering thing. A panicked bird trapped in a cage of her own anxieties. Her skills were academic, her combat potential negligible. She was, by every conceivable metric, a liability. The morning dragged on, a slow torture of bureaucratic procedure. One by one, the new Jonin instructors arrived to collect their teams. A formidable-looking man with a cigarette dangling from his lips took Team 10, the lazy genius Shikamaru Nara, the gluttonous Choji Akamichi, and the loud-mouthed Ino Yamanaka. A graceful woman with striking red eyes collected Team 8, Shino, Hinata, and a now subdued dog. Soon, only Team 7 remained. Hours passed. The sun climbed high into the sky, its heat baking the small classroom. Sakura fidgeted, her anxiety turning to frustration. Sasuke remained motionless, his patience a testament to his discipline. Though the tight set of his jaw betrayed his annoyance. Naruto simply waited. He used the time to meditate, not in the traditional sense, but by sinking into the low, thrumming hum of his own power. The quiet war song that was his birthright. It was a state of perfect readiness, a calm sea before the storm. He's late, Sakura finally exclaimed, slamming her hand on her desk. Every other team is gone. Where is he? She stood up, pacing back and forth. First Naruto has to be on our team, and now our sensei doesn't even bother to show up. It's not fair to Sasuke-kun. Naruto opened his eyes. Her priorities were as inefficient as her combat skills. He watched as she stomped over to the door, grabbing a dusty chalkboard eraser. "What are you doing?" Sasuke asked, his voice flat. "That's what he gets for being late," she declared, wedging the eraser in the top of the doorframe. It'll be hilarious. Naruto almost sighed. A pathetic prank. A child's trap. It was beneath contempt. But it also offered an opportunity. A data point. He wanted to see what kind of man their instructor was. Would he be perceptive enough to notice the trap? Annoyed enough to punish them for it? Or foolish enough to fall for it? A moment later, a hand appeared on the door, pushing it inward. The eraser fell, tumbling through the air in a perfect arc, and landed squarely on a head of gravity-defying silver hair. A cloud of chalk dust poofed into the air. Sakura burst into a fit of triumphant giggles. Sasuke's lip curled in a smirk of grudging approval. Naruto watched the man. He stood there for a long moment, a tall, lean figure in a standard Jonin flak jacket, a mask covering the lower half of his face. The chalk dust settled on his hair and shoulders. His visible eye, dark and lazy, blinked slowly. He looked at them, his gaze lingering on each of their faces for a fraction of a second. When his eye met Naruto's, there was a flicker of something that wasn't boredom. It was sharp, analytical. Recognition. My first impression of you all, the man said, his voice a placid drawl. Is that you're a bunch of idiots? The smiles vanished from Sakura's and Sasuke's faces. They stood on the roof of the academy, the afternoon breeze a welcome relief from the stuffy classroom. The entirety of Konoha sprawled out before them, a sea of rooftops under the watchful gaze of the Hokage monument. Their new sensei leaned against the railing, his posture the epitome of casual indifference. All right, let's get acquainted, he said, his eye crinkling in what might have been a smile. Why don't you introduce yourselves? You know, your likes, dislikes, dreams for the future, hobbies. Things like that. Why don't you go first, sensei? Sakura suggested, her earlier bravado replaced by a fawning eagerness. So we know how it's done. Me, he said, pointing a thumb at his chest. My name is Kakashi Hatake. Things I like and things I hate. I don't feel like telling you that. My dreams for the future, never really thought about it. As for my hobbies, I have lots of hobbies. He finished with another lazy eye smile. Your turn. You on the right. Naruto met his gaze. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. I like honing my skills and strategic analysis. I dislike inefficiency and wasted potential. My dream for the future is to become strong enough that no one can stand against me. He delivered the lines in a calm, even tone. There was no boastfulness, just a simple statement of fact. Kakashi's visible eyebrow rose slightly. He turned his gaze to Sakura. I'm Sakura Haruno, she began, blushing as she glanced at Sasuke. What I like, I mean, the person I like is, another giggle and a sideways glance. My hobby is, my dream for the future is, she squealed and hid her face. Combat effectiveness. 0, Naruto thought. Primary motivation. Infatuation with a teammate. A critical weakness. And what do you hate? Kakashi asked, his voice dripping with false interest. Naruto, she blurted out without a second's hesitation. Naruto didn't react. It was irrelevant data. Okay. Next, Kakashi said, turning to Sasuke. My name is Sasuke Uchiha, he said, his voice low and cold. I hate a lot of things, and I don't particularly like anything. What I have is not a dream, because I will make it a reality. I'm going to restore my clan and kill a certain man. The air grew heavy. The casual atmosphere evaporated, replaced by the chilling intensity of Sasuke's vow. Sakura looked at him with adoring, star-struck eyes. Kakashi's expression was unreadable, but Naruto felt a shift in his chakra. A flicker of something dark and ancient. A memory. Kakashi clapped his hands together, the sound startlingly loud. Good. You're all unique, and you all have your own ideas. We'll have our first mission tomorrow. Ooh, what kind of mission? Sakura asked, her enthusiasm returning. It's a task the four of us will do together, Kakashi said, his eye curving into a shape that was distinctly predatory. A survival exercise. A survival exercise. Sakura repeated, confused. But we did those in the academy. This should be a real mission. Kakashi chuckled, a low, ominous sound. This isn't like your previous training. This is a special test. And a very difficult one. In fact, of the 27 graduates this year, only 9 will actually become genin. The other 18 will be weeded out and sent back to the academy. This is a pass-fail test, and the failure rate is over 66%. The blood drained from Sakura's face. Even Sasuke looked tense. "See," Kakashi said, enjoying their discomfort. "I decide whether you pass or fail. Be at the designated training ground at 5 a.m. And, you'd better skip breakfast. You'll only throw it up." He vanished in a swirl of leaves, leaving the three of them alone on the rooftop. The silence was thick with unspoken anxieties and resentments. Sasuke was the first to move, turning and walking towards the stairs without a word. "Sasuke-kun, wait," Sakura called, rushing after him. Naruto remained, looking out over the village. A survival exercise. A test with a 2/3 failure rate. It wasn't a test of their academy skills. That much was obvious. It was a crucible. Kakashi wasn't just a Jonin instructor, he was a gatekeeper. He was here to see if they were soldiers or children playing at being soldiers. He felt the low thrum of the battle song in his veins, a gentle, eager hum. A real fight, a real opponent. The thought didn't excite him in a joyful way. It settled him. It was a return to his natural state. War was his element, and tomorrow, for the first time, he would be formally tested in it. He would not fail. Naruto did not skip breakfast. To enter a battle willing, underfueled was a tactical error of the highest order. He ate a protein-rich meal of fish and rice, his movements precise and unhurried. He then spent an hour methodically checking his equipment. Kunai were sharpened to a razor's edge. Shuriken were balanced and cleaned. The wire in his pouch was tested for tensile strength. He was a soldier preparing his kit before a campaign. He arrived at Training Ground 3 at 4:45 a.m. The field was a wide, grassy expanse, bordered on one side by a dense forest and on the other by a clear, fast-flowing river. 3 wooden posts stood in the center of the field, stark and solitary in the pre-dawn gloom. He didn't wait in the open. He slipped into the tree line, climbing a tall, sturdy oak that gave him a commanding view of the entire area. He settled onto a thick branch, his breathing slowing, his senses expanding. He became part of the forest, another shadow among the leaves. Sakura was the first to arrive, right at 5 a.m., her face a mixture of anxiety and sleep-deprived determination. Sasuke appeared a few minutes later, a silent specter materializing from the morning mist. They both stood in the open, easy targets. They waited, and waited. The sun rose, burning off the mist and bathing the field in golden light. Birds began to sing. The world woke up, but Kakashi did not appear. Sakura began to pace, muttering under her breath. Sasuke leaned against one of the posts. His arms crossed, his eyes closed in a mask of feigned patience. Naruto remained in the tree, perfectly still. He was not waiting. He was observing. He noted the wind direction, the potential ambush points in the surrounding woods, the way the river could be used as both an escape route and a barrier. He analyzed his teammates' body language. Sakura was a frayed nerve, her attention scattered. Sasuke was a coiled cobra, conserving his energy, but his focus was entirely internal, on his own frustration. Neither of them was scanning their surroundings. They had already failed the first, unspoken test, situational awareness. Finally, hours after the designated time, Kakashi appeared in a swirl of leaves. "Yo," he said cheerfully. "You're late," Sakura shrieked, pointing an accusing finger at him. Kakashi offered another lazy eye smile. "A black cat crossed my path, so I had to take the long way." He walked over to the center post and placed an alarm clock on top of it. "All right, it's set for noon." He held up 2 small, silver bells that jingled in the quiet morning air. "Your assignment is very simple. You just have to take these bells from me. That's all there is to it. If you can't get them by noon, you go without lunch. You'll be tied to those posts, and you'll watch while I eat my lunch in front of you." Sakura's stomach grumbled loudly. Sasuke's eyes narrowed. So that was why he told them to skip breakfast. A psychological tactic. Deplete their energy, shorten their tempers, and cloud their judgment. "Wait a minute," Sakura said, a frown creasing her brow. "There are 3 of us. Why are there only 2 bells?" Kakashi's eye curved into a grin. "Well, that way, at least one of you will end up tied to a post. That one will be disqualified for failing the mission and will go back to the academy. It could be one of you, or all 3 of you if you can't get a bell. You can use any weapon, including shuriken. If you're not Prepared to come at me with the intent to kill, you won't be able to get a bell. The air crackled with tension. This wasn't a test. It was a competition. A zero-sum game designed to turn them against each other. Naruto understood instantly. Kakashi wasn't testing their individual skills. He was testing their ability to function as a unit under duress. The objective was not to get a bell for oneself. The objective was for the team to secure the bells. The trap was the illusion of scarcity. When I say start, you can begin, Kakashi said, his hand hovering over his weapon pouch. Naruto didn't wait for the signal. The moment Kakashi's attention was on his two teammates, explaining the rules, the battle had already begun. He dropped from the tree, not with a thud, but with the silence of a falling leaf. He was already gone, melting back into the deeper shadows of the forest before the other two even realized he had been there. Ready, start. In an instant, Sakura and Sasuke leapt away, putting distance between themselves and the Jonin. Sakura fumbled for a kunai, her movements clumsy and panicked as she hid behind a bush. Sasuke, ever the prodigy, moved with fluid grace, concealing himself with practiced skill. They both did the same thing. They hid. A basic, predictable shinobi tactic. Kakashi stood in the clearing, seemingly relaxed. He looked around. Well, you've all hidden yourselves well. I'll give you that. Naruto, concealed in a dense thicket 100 meters away, watched his sensei. He wasn't looking at Kakashi. He was feeling him. He extended his senses, not his chakra. But something deeper, a primal battlefield awareness. He could feel the solid, unshakable core of Kakashi's power. The lazy posture was a facade. Beneath it, the man was a fortress, every angle covered. Every potential attack already anticipated. Attacking him head-on was suicide. He saw a flicker of movement. Sasuke. He burst from the trees, a blur of blue and white, his AR-MA streak of silver as he threw a volley of shuriken and kunai. The attack was fast, precise, and perfectly aimed. It was also completely useless. Kakashi didn't even seem to move. One moment the weapons were flying at him. The next they were gone, and he was standing exactly where he was before, holding them all casually in one hand. A direct assault, Kakashi murmured, sounding almost disappointed. Not a very creative approach. But Sasuke wasn't done. He was a distraction. He appeared behind Kakashi, his legs scything through the air in a powerful kick aimed at the Jonin's head. Kakashi simply ducked under it, his movements economical and effortless. He was toying with him. Naruto remained still. This was valuable intelligence. Sasuke was fast, his taijutsu was clean, but he was predictable. He was fighting a Jonin like he was fighting another student in a spar. He hadn't adjusted his tactics to the level of his opponent. He watched as Kakashi systematically dismantled Sasuke, countering his every move with humiliating ease, all while reading a small orange book he'd produced from his pouch. It was a deliberate, calculated insult, designed to shatter Sasuke's pride. Finally, Kakashi disappeared and reappeared behind Sasuke, performing a single-hand seal. Leaf Village Secret Finger Jutsu, 1,000 Years of Death. Kakashi shouted, and jammed his index and middle fingers into Sasuke's backside. The Uchiha prodigy was launched into the river with a comical shriek. Naruto processed the scene with cold detachment. Kakashi was using psychological warfare. He was breaking them down individually, exposing their weaknesses, proving to them the futility of a lone wolf approach. Next was Sakura. Naruto felt a flare of genjutsu from Kakashi's position. A moment later, a scream echoed through the forest. Sakura had been caught in an illusion. A simple, effective technique against a target with poor chakra control and a fragile mental state. One more asset neutralized. Now, only he remained. Kakashi knew it, too. The Jonin's relaxed posture tightened ever so slightly. His head tilted, his visible eye scanning the forest. He couldn't see Naruto, but he could feel his presence. A void in the natural flow of the forest's energy. Naruto decided it was time to change the dynamic. He formed a single-hand seal, pouring a precise amount of chakra into the technique. Taju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Not 1,000. That would be a waste of energy. Just 50. 50 silent clones flickered into existence throughout the forest, perfect copies, each one a sensor, a soldier, and a piece on the board. He saw the battlefield now not just from one perspective, but from 51. He saw Sasuke drag himself from the river, coughing and furious. He saw Sakura passed out cold from the shock of the genjutsu. And he saw Kakashi, whose eye had widened in genuine surprise. He had felt the massive, sudden surge of chakra. Shadow clones, Kakashi murmured, his book vanishing back into its pouch. The game was over. The real test was beginning. Not just one or two, either. This is unexpected. Naruto's plan was not a frontal assault. That was Sasuke's mistake. His plan was a siege. The first wave of clones attacked from all directions simultaneously. 10 from the front, 10 from the left, 10 from the right, 10 from behind, and 10 dropping from the trees above. It was a coordinated, multi-axis attack designed to overwhelm and disorient. Kakashi moved, and for the first time, he moved with purpose. He was a whirlwind of motion, his hands a blur as he deflected, parried, and destroyed the clones. He was impossibly fast, his taijutsu a fluid, deadly dance. But for every clone he dispelled with a puff of smoke, another took its place. They weren't fighting wildly. They fought with a cold, coordinated strategy. One clone would throw a kunai to force a dodge, while another would attack the opening created. A third would sweep at his legs, forcing a jump, setting him up for an attack from above. From his hidden position, the real Naruto was the general, processing the flood of information coming back from his clones as they were destroyed. Each one that popped was a report from the front lines. He was learning Kakashi's rhythm, his preferred counters, the subtle tells in his posture before he moved. He wasn't just attacking, he was mapping his enemy. Kakashi was impressed, and slightly unnerved. This wasn't the brute force of a Jinchuriki. This was tactical. The clones were using teamwork, something his actual teammates had failed to even consider. He decided to up the ante. His hands flew through a series of seals. Fire style. Fireball jutsu. A massive orb of flame erupted from his mouth, incinerating a dozen clones in a single, fiery blast. It was a demonstration of overwhelming power. A statement. But as the smoke cleared, he saw it was a feint. The fireball had forced him to plant his feet. While he was executing the jutsu, 3 clones had been burrowing through the ground beneath him. They erupted from the earth, grabbing his ankles and wrists. Earth style. Headhunter jutsu. Kakashi's eyes widened. He was caught. As the clones held him fast, another dozen leapt from the trees, kunai drawn. He got me, Kakashi thought, a flicker of genuine shock running through him. He used a large-scale attack to mask a small, precise trap. He sacrificed his own pieces to pin me. This kid. With a surge of chakra, Kakashi's body dissolved into a log. A substitution jutsu. The clones tackled empty wood. The real Kakashi was perched on a branch high above, his heart beating a little faster than he would have liked. He looked down at the remaining clones, who were already regrouping, forming a defensive perimeter. "You're different, Naruto," he called out, his voice losing some of its lazy drawl. "Very different from the reports. But a clever trap isn't enough." The real Naruto stepped out from his hiding place, his expression calm and unreadable. He looked at Kakashi, his blue eyes holding a weight that was far beyond his years. "That was not the trap," he said, his voice carrying easily through the clearing. "That was the distraction." Kakashi frowned. Distraction? For what? Naruto didn't answer. He simply looked down at Kakashi's hip, where the 2 silver bells had been tied. Where one silver bell now hung. Kakashi's hand shot to his waist. His visible eye went wide. One of the bells was gone. When? How? During the chaos of the multi-pronged attack. When he was focused on the fireball. During the substitution. The boy had created such a complex and overwhelming assault that he had managed to create an opening so small, so subtle, that a master sensor like himself hadn't even noticed. He had used 50 clones as a smokescreen to steal one tiny bell. "Not bad," Kakashi said, and this time, the praise was genuine. He dropped from the tree, landing lightly on the grass. "Not bad at all. You have 1 bell. But the test isn't over. There are 2 of you left, and only 1 bell remaining. What will you do now?" He was presenting the dilemma again, trying to force Naruto back into the competitive mindset. Naruto looked at the single bell in his hand. Then he looked over to where Sasuke was just now staggering out of the woods, his clothes soaked, his face a thunderous mask of humiliation and rage. He saw Sakura, slowly coming to, looking confused and frightened. He knew what Kakashi wanted. He wanted him to declare himself the winner, to abandon his teammates and pass alone. It was the final part of the trap. Naruto walked over to the center of the field, his movements deliberate. He held up the bell so both Sasuke and Kakashi could see it clearly. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he tossed it to Sasuke. Sasuke caught it out of sheer reflex, his eyes wide with disbelief. He stared at the bell in his hand, then at Naruto, his mind unable to process the action. What are you doing? He stammered. The objective is to acquire the bells, Naruto said, his voice flat. It is a team objective. You are part of this team. Now you have a bell. The mission is 50% complete. Sakura stared, her mouth agape. Kakashi stood perfectly still, his single eye unblinking. Of all the possible outcomes he had calculated, this was not one of them. The boy had outmaneuvered him, stolen a bell, and then willingly given it away. He wasn't just rejecting the premise of the competition, he was rewriting the rules of the entire test. There's still only one bell between you, Kakashi pressed. Testing him. And only one more on me. The clock is ticking. Correct, Naruto said, turning his full attention back to the Jonin. His eyes began to glow, the blue deepening into a chilling crimson-tinged sapphire. The air around him grew heavy, charged with a palpable pressure that was part chakra, part something else. Something older and far more terrifying. Which means we only need to take one more. Quote, he didn't look at Sasuke. He didn't need to. He addressed him as a commander addresses a soldier. Uchiha, your Sharingan allows you to track high-speed movement, correct? Sasuke, still clutching the bell, blinked. Yes. Good. Kakashi's primary strength is his speed and his ability to misdirect. He will use substitution to escape any direct assault. Therefore, a direct assault is what we will give him, but it will be a feint. Your job is not to hit him. Your job is to track him. Pinpoint his location after every substitution. Do not lose sight of him. He then turned his gaze toward Sakura, who flinched. Sakura, your chakra control is precise, but your reserves are low. You are not a frontline fighter. You will stay back. Your role is analysis. Kakashi is toying with us. But he is still consuming chakra. Watch him. Look for any sign of fatigue, any repeated patterns. You are our intelligence officer. He had given them roles. Purpose. He hadn't asked them to be his friends. He had conscripted them into his army. He turned back to Kakashi, dropping into a low, predatory crouch. The battle song was rising in his blood now, a clear, sharp melody. I will be the vanguard. I will force him to move. Uchiha, on my signal, you will begin your pursuit. Sakura, begin your analysis. Now, before anyone could object, he exploded forward. He moved with a speed that made Sasuke's previous attack look sluggish. He wasn't using a simple chakra enhancement. He was moving with the unnatural grace of a demigod, his every step a perfect application of force and momentum. He closed the distance to Kakashi in a heartbeat, his fist drawn back. It wasn't a wild punch. It was a precise, brutal strike aimed at Kakashi's center of mass. Kakashi's eye widened. This speed, this killing intent, it was real. He substituted at the last possible second, his body vanishing and reappearing on the other side of the clearing. Now, Uchiha, Naruto commanded, not even looking to see where Kakashi had gone. Sasuke, shaken from his stupor by the sheer ferocity of Naruto's command, reacted on instinct. His eyes, which had been burning with humiliation, now blazed with competitive fire. He located Kakashi instantly and charged, kunai in hand. It was a perfect pincer. Naruto was the hammer, Sasuke the anvil. Kakashi was forced to move again, dodging Sasuke's attack, only to be met by a fresh assault from Naruto. He was being herded, forced into a reactive state. This was no longer a Jonin toying with Genin. This was a genuine battle. Kakashi was forced to use his full speed. His movements a blur as he weaved between the two boys. He was still superior, still untouchable, but he wasn't in control anymore. He was reacting to Naruto's strategy. The alarm clock on the post began to ring, its shrill cry signaling noon. The fighting stopped instantly. Naruto pulled back, his crimson-tinged eyes fading back to blue. Sasuke, breathing heavily, skidded to a halt. There was a long silence, broken only by the chirping of birds and the ringing of the clock. Kakashi stood in the middle of the field, not a scratch on him, but his lazy demeanor was gone. He was looking at Naruto with an expression of profound shock and something that looked unnervingly like fear. He let out a long breath. "You pass," he said, his voice quiet. Sakura gasped. Sasuke stared, the bell still clutched tightly in his hand. "All of you," Kakashi clarified, his gaze sweeping over the three of them before landing back on Naruto. He walked over to the memorial stone at the edge of the clearing. His back to them. "In the shinobi world," he said, his voice taking on a somber tone, "those who break the rules are scum." "That's true. But those who abandon their comrades are worse than scum." He turned back to face them. "The test was designed to see if you could put the mission, the bells, ahead of your own self-interest and work as a team. You were supposed to figure out that to defeat me, the three of you had to come at me as one." He looked at Sakura and Sasuke. "You two were obsessed with the bells and were ready to sacrifice your teammate. And you," he looked at Naruto. "You understood the real objective from the very beginning. You didn't just understand it. You enforced it. You turned a dysfunctional group of individuals into a combat unit, not through friendship, but through sheer force of will." He gave them a real, genuine smile, his eye crinkling at the corner. "Team 7 begins its first mission tomorrow. Congratulations." Later that evening, Naruto sat on the floor of his Spartan apartment. The adrenaline of the battle had faded, leaving behind the quiet, steady hum of his power. He had passed the test. He had a team. He had a path forward. But he felt no joy. Only a sense of grim satisfaction. The forge had tested him, and he had not been found wanting. He lay back on his bed, the exhaustion of the day finally settling in. Sleep came quickly, but it was not a peaceful one. He found himself standing on a vast, cracked plain under a brassy, blood-red sky. The ground was littered with broken weapons, spears, swords, shields, and the air tasted of ash and old blood. In the distance, a colossal fortress of black iron and bronze stood silent, its gates sealed. It was a place of ancient, forgotten conflict. A graveyard of gods. He was not alone. A figure stood before him, tall and broad-shouldered, clad in archaic bronze armor that seemed to drink the unnatural light. The man's face was hidden by the shadow of a grim, horsehair-crested helmet. But Naruto could feel the immense, suffocating weight of his power. It was like his own, but magnified 1,000 times. It was the roar of a supernova next to the hum of a forge. "So, the stray has finally learned to bite," the armored figure rumbled, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. It was a voice that had commanded legions and leveled mountains. "You carry the scent of the mortal woman." A weakness. Naruto stood his ground, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. He felt no fear, only a cold, defiant rage. "Who are you?" The figure took a step forward, and the very ground trembled. "I am the consequence of our father's folly. His indulgence. I am the true son. The pure blood." The shadowed helmet tilted. "And you, little half-breed, you are an abomination. An insult to our lineage that must be scoured clean." The armored warrior raised a hand, and a massive, double-bitted axe, pulsing with a malevolent red light, materialized in his grip. "The old man may sit on his throne and ignore your existence, but I will not. I will find you, little brother. And I will drag you back to this field in chains and off. Your blood to the hallowed ground where true warriors belong." The figure charged, the axe raised high, and Naruto woke up with a gasp, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was drenched in a cold sweat, the phantom smell of ash and blood still clinging to the air in his small apartment. He sat up, his breathing slowly returning to normal. It was not just a dream. It was a message, a threat. His world had just gotten infinitely larger. Konoha, the shinobi nations, the Akatsuki, they were all just pieces on a small, insignificant corner of the board. A far older, far more dangerous game was being played, and he was now a part of it. He looked out his window at the moonlit village. It was not his home. It was a training ground. A place to gather strength for the real war that was coming. The song in his blood shifted its melody. It was no longer just a song of battle. It was a song of survival. And it had never sounded clearer. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Weight of a Name. The life of a genin, Naruto quickly discovered, was a special kind of hell. It wasn't the hell of open combat, of blood and steel under a wrathful sky. It was the hell of 1,000 tedious cuts, of mind-numbing, soul-crushing menial labor. Their first week of missions was an insult to the very concept of a shinobi. They pulled weeds from a wealthy merchant's garden, a task Naruto completed with chilling efficiency by calculating the precise tensile strength of each weed's root system and applying the minimum force necessary for extraction. He finished his section in under an hour, then stood silently, watching with a critical eye as Sasuke worked with a sullen, simmering fury, and Sakura spent more time trying to impress Sasuke with her non-existent gardening skills than actually working. They painted a fence, a job Naruto approached like the fortification of a perimeter. His strokes were even, his lines perfect, his use of paint calculated to the last drop. There was no wasted motion, no drips, no errors. Kakashi had watched him for a long time that day, his single visible eye narrowed in a state of profound confusion, as if he were trying to understand a foreign language. Ey babysat the fire daimyo's wife's obese, ill-tempered cat, Tora, a creature that was less a feline and more a small, furry demon of spite and fury. Sasuke and Sakura had spent an hour chasing it through the streets of Konoha. Naruto, ignoring their chaotic pursuit, had simply mapped the cat's probable escape routes, set a simple snare using a piece of dried fish as bait, and captured the beast in under 5 minutes. He'd carried it back to its owner, holding it in a grip that was both inescapable and yet caused no injury, his expression as placid as if he were carrying a sack of rice. Through it all, the dynamic of Team 7 solidified into a state of barely functional friction. Sakura orbited Sasuke, a desperate moon to his dark, distant planet. Sasuke tolerated her presence, his attentio fixed on some internal horizon where only his brother's ghost resided. And Naruto was a foreign object in their equation. He didn't try to make friends. He didn't compete for attention. Performed the objective with a level of focus that was both unnerving and deeply alienating. He was there, but he wasn't with them. I can't take it anymore, Sakura wailed, throwing a pair of rusty hedge clippers to the ground. They were on their 5th day, tasked with trimming the hedges of the Inuzuka compound, a job made infinitely more difficult by the constant yapping of a dozen ninja hounds. We're shinobi, not gardeners and cat-sitters. I want a real mission. Something that will let Sasuke-kun show off how amazing he is. Sasuke, who was methodically sharpening a kunai he had no intention of using on the hedges, grunted in agreement. This is a waste of time. We're not getting any stronger doing this. Naruto finished his section of the hedge, the lines as straight and perfect as a military haircut. This is a test, he stated, his voice flat. A test of what? Our patience, Sasuke sneered. Of discipline, Naruto corrected, turning to face them. His eyes were calm, but they held a glint of steel. The ability to perform a task you find beneath you with the same focus as one you find glorious. The ability to function as a unit in a state of prolonged boredom. It is a test of a soldier's temperament. And you are both failing. Before Sasuke could retort, Kakashi appeared, leaning against a nearby tree and reading his ever-present orange book. He's not wrong, he said cheerfully, not looking up from his page. But, since you're so eager, I suppose we could try something a little more challenging. The mission scroll, when presented in the Hokage's office, seemed simple enough. C rank, escort and protection detail. The client was a master bridge builder named Tizuna, a grizzled old man with gray, spiky hair, a thick beard, and a towel wrapped around his neck. He smelled of sake and sawdust, and his eyes, bloodshot and weary, held a deep, simmering anger. He took one look at the 3 genin standing before him and scoffed. This is what they send to protect me. A bunch of snot-nosed kids. Especially the short one with the stupid look on his face. He was, of course, referring to Naruto. Naruto didn't react. The man's assessment was based on flawed visual data. It was irrelevant. Sasuke, however, bristled at the insult to his team, and Sakura looked ready to leap to Naruto's defense, if only to show what a good, team-oriented person she was. I am a master bridge builder. Tizuna slurred, taking a swig from a small bottle he produced from his tunic. I expect to be protected by masters, not apprentices. Are you even old enough to shave, boy? He directed at Sasuke. Kakashi stepped forward, his lazy eye crinkling. I'm a Jonin, and I will be leading the mission. They are more than capable, I assure you. We will protect you with our lives. The words were standard shinobi rhetoric, but Naruto heard the subtle undertone in Kakashi's voice. A hint of warning, a promise. The journey out of the village was uneventful. The sun was warm, the road clear. Sakura, seizing the opportunity, tried to walk next to Sasuke, peppering him with questions about his training that he pointedly ignored. Naruto took the rear guard position, his senses extended, his gaze sweeping across the landscape. He wasn't looking at the scenery. He was mapping the terrain, noting choke points, ambush spots, and potential sources of cover. He felt the puddle before he saw it. It was a small, insignificant thing in the middle of the road. But the day was hot and there had been no rain for a week. The ground around it was bone dry. A discrepancy, an impossibility. His hand drifted casually towards the kunai pouch on his hip. Kakashi saw it too. Naruto watched his sensei's gait remain unchanged, his posture still relaxed, but a subtle tension entered his shoulders. He was aware. He was letting it happen. Another test. They walked past the puddle. The world exploded in a blur of motion. Chains erupted from the water, shooting forward like steel vipers. They wrapped around Kakashi in an instant, and before Sakura or Sasuke could even gasp, the chains were pulled taut. Kakashi's body was shredded into a dozen bloody pieces. Sakura screamed, a raw, piercing sound of pure terror. Sasuke froze, his eyes wide, the Uchiha pride momentarily shattered by the sheer, brutal suddenness of the violence. This wasn't a spar. This wasn't a test with bells. This was real. Two figures materialized from where the puddle had been. They were large men, clad in the flak jackets of Kurigakure, the village hidden in the mist. They wore metal gauntlets from which the chains extended, and their faces were covered in bandages, giving them a ghoulish, menacing appearance. One down, one of them rasped, his eyes fixing on the terrified genin. His gaze swept over them and locked onto the most valuable target. Now, hand over the old man. They moved, their target not the frozen shinobi, but the bridge builder. They never made it. Naruto moved in the space between heartbeats. In the silent gap between Sakura's scream and Sasuke's recovery. The battle song in his blood didn't rise. It sharpened, a single, clear note of lethal purpose. He appeared in front of Tazuna, a solid, unmovable wall. He didn't draw a kunai. He didn't make a hand seal. As the first mist nin charged, swinging his chained gauntlet like a meteor hammer, Naruto met the attack head-on. He didn't block. He parried. His left forearm, reinforced with a razor-thin layer of chakra, met the chain not with force, but with a precise, angled deflection. The chain slid harmlessly past him. The mist nin, overbalanced and unprepared for the lack of resistance, stumbled forward, his flank exposed for a fatal fraction of a second. Naruto's right hand, held in a rigid spear hand formation, shot forward. He didn't aim for the chest or the head. He aimed for the subclavian nerve cluster at the base of the man's neck. The strike landed with a sound like a wet twig snapping. The mist nin's eyes went wide with shock, his entire right arm going instantly, completely limp. The chained gauntlet fell from his nerveless fingers and clattered to the ground. Before the first shinobi had even registered the crippling blow, Naruto was already moving on the second. This one, seeing his brother neutralized, reacted with fury, detaching his chain and swinging the gauntlet in a wide, sweeping arc. Naruto dropped, sliding under the attack on the dusty road. He came up inside the man's guard, too close for the weapon to be brought to bear. His fist, glowing with the faint, coppery aura of his lineage, drove upward. Not a punch, a piston strike. It connected with the man's sternum. The sound was a sickening, wet crunch that echoed in the sudden silence. The mist nin's yes rolled back in his head as the air was violently expelled from his lungs, his ribs shattering inward. He collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut, a broken, wheezing heap on the ground. The entire engagement had lasted less than 3 seconds. Silence descended, thick and heavy. Sakura stared, her scream having died in her throat. Sasuke, who had just managed to draw a kunai, stood frozen. Looking from the two disabled assassins to Naruto, his mind struggling to reconcile the bumbling dead last from the academy with the brutally efficient warrior standing before him. Tizuna looked like he was about to be sick. "Nicely done, Naruto." Kakashi's voice, calm and untroubled, came from the trees. He dropped to the ground, not a scratch on him. The pile of bloody flesh that had been his body dissolved into water and chunks of wood. A substitution. Sasuke. Good, you didn't move. Sakura. You too, Kakashi said, though his praise sounded hollow. He knew they hadn't remained still out of discipline, but out of fear. His gaze lingered on Naruto, his single eye filled with a complex mixture of pride, awe, and a deep, unsettling apprehension. You handled that with precision, Naruto. But you didn't have to. Naruto looked down at the two groaning men. They were a threat to the client. I neutralized the threat. You shattered his sternum, Kakashi pointed out, nudging the second ninja with his foot. And you gave him permanent nerve damage, he added, glancing at the first. That's a bit more than neutralized. A half measure is an invitation to a second attack, Naruto stated simply. They will live. They will not fight again. The threat is permanently removed. It is the most efficient outcome. Kakashi had no response to that cold, irrefutable logic. He turned his attention to Tizuna. His lazy demeanor completely gone, replaced by the sharp edge of the copy ninja. Tizuna-san, he said, his voice dangerously low. These are Chunin from the village hidden in the mist. Professional assassins. AC rank mission involves, at most, bandits or petty thieves. This is an A- rank, possibly higher. You lied on the mission request. Tizuna flinched, sweating under Kakashi's sharp gaze. We are operating outside the scope of the mission parameters, Kakashi continued. This contract is void. We're returning to Konoha. He looked at his students. Protecting. Tizuna now will likely involve combat with Jonin-level shinobi. You are not ready. Sakura nodded emphatically, her face pale. This was too much. This was death. Sasuke, however, looked conflicted. His pride stung from his earlier hesitation. To run away now would be an admission of weakness. He looked at the two defeated Chunin, then at Naruto, who stood impassively, as if the whole affair was a mild inconvenience. Tizuna finally broke. He sank to his knees, his bravado crumbling away to reveal a desperate, terrified old man. Please, he begged, his voice cracking. You can't. If you leave, I'm a dead man. But it's not just me. My country, the land of waves, is dying. He told them of Gato, the shipping magnate who had taken over their island nation, using his immense wealth to hire mercenaries and thugs to enforce his tyrannical rule. He controlled the seas, the only lifeline to the outside world. The bridge Tizuna was building was their only hope for freedom, a way to break Gato's stranglehold. But Gato had hired powerful shinobi to ensure that bridge was never finished. They'll kill me, Tizuna finished, tears streaming down his face. And they will kill my family. My daughter. My grandson, please. You're our only hope. It was a compelling, emotional plea. And it was a moral dilemma that Kakashi deliberately laid at the feet of his students. It's not our problem, Sakura whispered. Though she looked ashamed to say it. We're just genin. Kakashi looked at Sasuke. Sasuke. Sasuke's jaw was tight. A mission is a mission. We accepted the contract. It was a statement of pride, not compassion. Kakashi's gaze fell on Naruto. The deciding vote. Naruto hadn't been watching Tizuna. He had been listening to the details of his story, processing the information. Gato. A tyrant. A man who used mercenaries. A battle fought not with armies, but with economics and targeted assassinations. We continue the mission, Naruto said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Naruto. No, Sakura protested. You saw what happened. We could be killed. Naruto turned his gaze on her. This Gato is a king who oppresses his people. He uses wealth to hire swords. This is not an unknown variable. He is a predictable tyrant. The strategic objective is clear. Protect the bridge builder, break the siege, and decapitate the enemy leadership. The risk is high, but the objective is achievable. He looked at Kakashi. Leaving a known threat to fester is strategically unsound. It will only grow stronger. His analysis was cold, devoid of the emotion Tizuna had tried to evoke. He wasn't doing this out of the kindness of his heart. He was doing it because it was a sound military decision. He spoke of kings and sieges, of strategy and decapitation, words that sound strange and ancient coming from the mouth of a 12-year-old boy. Kakashi studied him for a long moment, a strange look in his eye. Very well, he said, a smile returning to his face. The Cleon's continued safety is now an A-rank mission. Let's move. The boat ride to the land of waves was a journey into the heart of a phantom. A thick, unnaturally heavy mist rolled across the water, swallowing the world, muffling sound and chilling the air. It clung to the skin, cold and damp, and carried with it a palpable sense of dread. Naruto stood at the prow of the small skiff, his eyes closed, his senses straining against the oppressive blanket of white. He could feel it, a presence, a single, powerful signature, radiating a killing intent so pure and cold it was like a shard of ice in the soul. It was the antithesis of his own power. His was the hot, forging fire of the battlefield. This was the cold, silent finality of the executioner's block. Kakashi-sensei, he said, his voice low. I know, Kakashi replied, his hand already on his forehead protector, ready to unveil his hidden eye. The lazy instructor was gone. In his place was a predator, poised and deadly. Get ready. A shape coalesced in the mist. A man, standing casually on the surface of the water, his back to them. He turned slowly, and the air grew 10 degrees colder. He was tall and lean, with the same bandaged face as the Chunin they'd faced. But he wore no shirt, his chest crisscrossed with belts that held a weapon of impossible size. A massive blade, as tall as a man, with a single, semicircular hole in the top and a razor-sharp edge. The man's eyes, cold and dark, fixed on them. Zabuza Momochi, Kakashi breathed, his voice tight. Demon of the hidden mist. Kakashi of the Sharingan, Zabuza replied, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. I should have known. I'll have to ask you to hand over the old man. Sasuke's breath hitched. The Zabuza, one of the 7 ninja swordsmen of the mist. An S-rank rogue ninja. The gap in power between him and the Chunin from the road was not a gap. It was a chasm. He could feel the pressure of Zabuza's chakra, a heavy, suffocating weight that made it hard to breathe. Protect the client, Kakashi ordered, his voice sharp as he slid his headband up, revealing the spinning, 3-tomo Sharingan in his left eye. This is a little out of your league. He battle that followed was a clash of titans. It was a blur of water clones, substitutions, and jutsu that made the very air tremble. Zabuza was a master of the silent killing technique, using the mist to his advantage. Striking from nowhere and vanishing again. But Kakashi's Sharingan saw through every deception, predicting every move. Finally, Zabuza made his move. He trapped Kakashi in a sphere of water. A jutsu that was both a prison and a slow, suffocating death sentence. A water clone, a perfect, liquid replica of himself, materialized to deal with the rest of them. You think wearing a protector and acting like a ninja makes you one? The clone sneered, its watery eyes falling on the 3 genin. When I was your age, these hands were already stained with the blood of over 100 men. Sasuke trembled, not with fear, but with a strange, exhilarating terror. This was it, the real world. He drew a kunai, his knuckles white. Sakura stood frozen in front of Tazuna, a human shield who could do nothing but tremble. The Zabuza clone flickered, appearing in front of Sasuke. A single kick sent the Uchiha prodigy flying, his pride and his body crashing against a tree. The clone turned its attention to Naruto. But Naruto wasn't there. He was looking at the real Zabuza, standing on the water, his hand held against the surface of the prison, maintaining the jutsu. He saw a tactical situation with absolute clarity. Kakashi, their commander, was incapacitated. The enemy had divided his forces, using a clone to handle the weaker targets while the main body focused on the primary objective. A classic strategy. The key was to break the enemy's focus. He didn't speak. He simply acted. He created a single shadow clone. It charged the water clone head-on, a deliberate, obvious distraction. As the Zabuza clone turned to intercept it, the real Naruto exploded into motion. He didn't run towards the water. He ran along the shoreline, parallel to Zabuza. He threw a kunai, not at the mist nin, but high into the air, trailing a thin, nearly invisible ninja wire. Zabuza saw the move and dismissed it as a pathetic, desperate gambit. A mistake. Naruto leapt, grabbing the wire. He didn't pull himself towards the kunai. He used it as a pivot point, swinging in a wide, blindingly fast arc over the water. He was a human pendulum, using physics and strategy to bypass enemy's guard and alter his attack vector in midair. He was no longer aiming for the Zabuza on the shore. He was descending, a meteor of orange and black, directly on top of the real Zabuza. Zabuza's eyes widened in shock. The boy's ingenuity was unexpected. He had only a split second to react. He had to choose: maintain the prison and take the hit, or release his commander and defend himself. The decision was made for him. As Naruto descended, the rage in his blood surged. Not the hot, wild rage of the fox. This was the cold, focused fury of the god of war. His eyes burned crimson. The coppery aura flared around his fist. A corona of pure, divine power. He wasn't aiming a punch. He was delivering a verdict. He slammed his fist not into Zabuza's body, but onto the surface of the wall. Chair right next to the hand maintaining the prison. The impact didn't create a splash. It created a shockwave, a concussive blast of pure force that flash-boiled the water and shattered the jutsu from the outside. The water prison exploded, freeing a gasping Kakashi. Zabuza was thrown back by the force of the blast, his arm numb, his mind reeling. What was that power? It wasn't ninjutsu. It was something else. Something raw and primal. Naruto landed lightly on the water's surface, his chakra control perfect. He stood back to back with his sensei, his crimson eyes fixed on the stunned demon of the mist. Across the water, Sasuke staggered to his feet, staring in disbelief, a kunai still clutched in his trembling hand. He had been kicked aside like a child, while Naruto had just go toe-to-toe with an S-rank ninja and freed the copy ninja himself. The mist swirled, heavy and silent. The battle had paused, the board reset. But the pieces were in entirely new positions. It was no longer a Jonin against a Jonin with 3 liabilities. It was now a master against a master, and a god of war in the making. Deep in the recesses of his mind, Naruto felt a flicker of something else. A flash of a blood-red sky, of a cracked and barren plain. He saw a titanic figure in bronze armor, standing on a distant hill, watching him. The figure gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. Nod of approval, of acknowledgement, as if to say, "So, you are not entirely worthless." The presence vanished, but the weight of it remained. A promise of a far greater, far more terrible war to come. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Echoes of the Blade. The mist, which had been Zabuza's ally, now seemed to hold its breath. The ripples from Naruto's concussive strike lapped gently against the shore, the only sound in a world that had gone unnervingly silent. Zabuza Momochi, demon of the hidden mist, stood 50 feet away, his massive executioner's blade held in a defensive posture. The bravado was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating watchfulness. He wasn't just looking at Kakashi of the Sharingan anymore. His gaze kept flicking to the blonde-haired genin who stood beside him, a boy whose chakra felt like a raging storm contained in a fragile vessel. Sasuke was on his feet, his body screaming in protest from the single, contemptuous kick he'd received. The physical pain was nothing compared to the searing acid of humiliation and disbelief churning in his gut. He had been dismissed, swatted aside, while Naruto had just changed the entire tactical landscape. He had freed their commander and forced an S-rank opponent into a stalemate. The gap between them, which Sasuke had always perceived as a vast chasm with himself on the superior side, had just been revealed as something else entirely. It was a canyon, and Sasuke was at the bottom, looking up into a blood-red sky. "You've got interesting brats, Kakashi," Zabuza rasped, his voice a low growl. "Especially that one. That power. It's not a tailed beast's. It's something older." Kakashi didn't respond. His Sharingan was spinning, analyzing not only Zabuza, but the boy standing next to him. The sheer, raw force Naruto had unleashed was beyond anything he could explain. It wasn't the Kyuubi's chaotic, malevolent chakra. It was focused, disciplined, and felt as ancient as the ground beneath their feet. However, Zabuza continued, re-gripping his blade. A cornered rat is still just a rat. He began to channel his chakra, the mist thickening around him, coiling like a serpent. This ends now. But the attack never came. Two Senbon needles, thin and sharp as a whisper, shot out of the mist from a completely different direction. They moved with impossible speed and precision, striking Zabuza in the neck at the junction of his spine and skull. Zabuza's eyes went wide, his body stiffened, a choked gurgle escaping his lips. The immense killing intent that had been flooding the area vanished, snuffed out like a candle flame. He swayed for a moment, then collapsed forward, landing face down in the water with a heavy splash. A figure landed silently on the shore next to the fallen demon. It was a person of slight build, clad in the standard Kurigakure uniform, but wearing a white hunter nin mask, patterned with thin red lines and the village's symbol. The newcomer's gender was impossible to determine, their entire presence a neutral. A motionless void. "You were right," the hunter nin said, their voice soft and melodic, strangely at odds with their deadly profession. It was his last battle. Kakashi's visible eye narrowed, a hunter nin from the village hidden in the mist. The hunter nin bowed slightly. "I thank you for your assistance. I have been tracking Zabuza for a long time, waiting for an opportunity to take him down." They knelt beside Zabuza's body, checking for a pulse that wasn't there. "My mission is to eliminate rogue ninja and ensure their village's secrets do not fall into enemy hands. This includes disposing of the body on site." Without another word, the hunter nin lifted Zabuza's corpse with surprising ease, hefting it over their shoulder. They gave a final nod to Kakashi and then, in a flicker of movement, vanished back into the mist as silently as they had appeared. The battle was over. The oppressive chakra signature was gone. The mist began to thin, revealing the mundane reality of the shore. The trees, and the placid water. Sakura let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Tazuna collapsed to his knees in relief. Sasuke stared at the spot where the hunter nin had been. His mind racing. It was too clean. Too convenient. "He's gone," Sakura said, her voice trembling. "We did it." Naruto didn't relax. His senses were still extended. The battle song a low hum in his blood. Something was wrong. The narrative was flawed. Assassins, especially ones of Zabuza's caliber, were not so easily dispatched. "Kakashi-sensei," Naruto began, turning his head. He never finished the sentence. Kakashi swayed, his hand clutching his head, and then his legs gave out. He collapsed to the ground, unconscious. "Sensei!" Sakura shrieked, rushing to his side. Naruto was there first. He knelt, his fingers going to the pulse point on Kakashi's neck. It was steady, but thready. He looked at the exposed Sharingan. The three Tomo were still spinning, but sluggishly. "Chakra exhaustion," Naruto diagnosed, his voice sharp and commanding, cutting through the rising panic. He pushed the Sharingan too far. "We need to move him to a secure location. Now." The sudden, decisive authority in his tone shocked Sakura and Sasuke into silence. The goofy prankster, the loud-mouthed dead last, was gone. In his place was a field commander. "Sasuke," Naruto ordered, his eyes already scanning the surrounding terrain. "You take point. Your eyes are sharpest. Watch for any followers. Sakura, you and Tazuna help me with Kakashi. We move to the client's house. No stops. No delays." Sasuke bristled at taking orders, especially from him, but he couldn't argue with the logic. He was stunned, off balance, while Naruto was thinking with a clarity that was unnerving. Gritting his teeth, he gave a curt nod and moved to the head of their small formation, his kunai drawn, his eyes sweeping the trees. Together, they half-carried, half-dragged their unconscious sensei, following Tazuna off the path and into the sparse woods that bordered his village. The silence of the journey was heavy, each of them lost in the violent whirlwind of the last hour. Sakura kept glancing at Naruto's face, searching for any sign of the boy she knew, but finding only a grim, focused mask. Sasuke walked ahead, his rage and confusion a burning fire in his chest. He had dedicated his entire life to becoming strong, to avenging his clan. Today, he had learned that his definition of strength was laughably inadequate. And Naruto, the one person he had never, ever considered a rival, was the one who had taught him that lesson. Tazuna's house was a simple, two-story wooden structure, weathered by the sea air but sturdy and well-kept. A woman with dark hair tied back in a bun rushed out to meet them. Her face etched with worry. This was Tsunami, Tazuna's daughter. Her eyes widened at the sight of the unconscious Kakashi. Father, what happened? Later, Tazuna grunted, his face pale. Help us get him inside. They laid Kakashi on a futon in a small, sparse guest room. Tsunami, her movements efficient and calm, brought water and clean cloths. As she tended to their sensei, a small boy appeared in the doorway. He was no older than 8, with dark, spiky hair and eyes that were old and filled with a bitter, cynical anger. This was Inari, Tsunami's son. He looked at the unconscious ninja, then at the 3 genin, his lip curling in a sneer. You'll all be dead soon, he said, his voice flat and devoid of childish innocence. They'll come back and kill you. No one can stand up to Gato. Inari, Tsunami scolded, her voice sharp. That's enough. Go to your room. The boy glared at them all one last time, his eyes lingering on Naruto with a particular venom. Before turning and stomping away. I'm sorry, Tsunami said, bowing her head. He hasn't been the same since. She trailed off, her voice thick with unshed tears. Naruto watched the exchange with a detached interest. The boy's despair was a tactical variable. A population that has lost hope is a population that will not fight, will not aid, will not resist. It makes them a liability. An hour later, Kakashi stirred. He sat up slowly, his head in his hands. Man, I overdid it, he groaned. The Sharingan is a powerful tool, but it takes a heavy toll if you're not an Uchiha. He looked around the room, his gaze settling on his 3 students. First things first, he said, his voice serious. Zabuza is alive. The statement dropped into the room like a stone. But that Hunter Nin. Sakura protested. We saw the body. Think about it, Kakashi said, his voice patient but firm. Hunter Nin are supposed to destroy a body immediately, on the spot, to protect its secrets. He took the body with him. Second, think about the weapons he used. Senbon needles. They have low killing power, unless you hit a vital organ. They're most often used in medicine, to str. Ike pressure points and induce a near-death state. He looked at each of them in turn. That Hunter Nin was Zabuza's partner. He saved him from me and bought him time to recover. They will be back, probably in a week, once Zabuza has healed. A week. They had 1 week to prepare for a rematch with an enemy who had defeated their Jonin leader. The despair that Inari had voiced now felt like a cold, physical presence in the room. So what do we do? Sakura asked, her voice barely a whisper. We can't fight him. You could barely beat him, sensei. That's why we're going to train, Kakashi said, a determined glint in his eye. He pushed himself to his feet, still wobbly. And you're going to start right now. All of you. Your chakra control is atrocious. He gestured for them to follow him. Come on. There's no time to waste. He led them to a clearing deep in the forest behind Tazuna's house, filled with towering, ancient trees. Kakashi, leaning on a crutch he'd fashioned from a branch, looked up at the massive trunks. The objective is simple, he announced, pulling a kunai from his pouch. You are going to climb these trees. We climb trees all the time, Sakura said, looking confused. Without using your hands, Kakashi finished. He channeled a small, precise amount of chakra to the soles of his feet and then, with a casualness that was infuriating, walked straight up T. He sighed of a massive tree until he was standing upside down on a thick branch high above them. The idea is to focus a constant, precise stream of chakra to your feet to create a force of attraction. Too little, and you'll fall. Too much, and you'll be pushed away from the tree, breaking the surface. It requires delicate, continuous control. It's a fundamental skill for any shinobi. He tossed 3 kunai down to them. Use these to mark how high you get. Now, begin. Sakura, ever the diligent student with the best theoretical knowledge, went first. She concentrated, her brow furrowed in focus, and took a running start. Her first step landed solidly on the trunk. Then the second, the third. She took a dozen steps before her control wavered, the chakra flow becoming uneven. She was blasted off the tree, but not before she managed to slash a mark with her kunai, a good 20 feet up. With a cry of triumph, she landed deftly on the ground. Hey, I'm better at this than you, Sasuke-kun. She gloated. Sasuke scowled, as if. He took a deep breath, focusing his own chakra. His Uchiha pride, already wounded, would not allow him to be shown up. He charged the tree. His first attempt was a failure. He put too much power into it and his foot blasted a chunk of bark off the trunk. But he was a genius. He learned from his mistakes. On his second try, he made it almost as high as Sakura. On the third, he surpassed her mark by several feet, landing with a smug look on his face. Then it was Naruto's turn. He stood before the tree, closing his eyes. He reached inward, to the roaring sea of energy that was his core. It was a maelstrom. There was his own potent chakra, a deep, powerful river. Twined around it was the Kyuubis, a volcanic, hateful inferno. And underpinning it all was the divine essence of his father. A force like a supernova, humming with the boundless, violent energy of conflict itself. Kakashi had asked him to produce a delicate, constant stream. That was like asking him to draw a single cup of water from the heart of a hurricane. He took a deep breath and tried. He focused, trying to pull just a tiny thread of that power, to channel it to his feet. He charged the tree. The moment his foot made contact, an explosion of force erupted from the sole of his sandal. It didn't just blast him off the trunk, it blew a crater 3 feet wide in the ancient wood, sending splinters and chunks of bark flying in all directions. He was thrown backward, tumbling through the air before landing hard on his back, the wind knocked out of him. Sasuke stared at the crater, then at Naruto. His smug expression replaced by one of utter shock. That wasn't a failure of control. That was a catastrophic power surge. Sakura's jaw was hanging open. Naruto, Kakashi called down from his branch. His voice strained. Maybe. Try it with a little less enthusiasm. Naruto gritted his teeth, got up, and tried again. And again. And again. The result was always the same. Either he couldn't get enough chakra to stick at all, or he channeled a fraction too much and the result was explosive destruction. He wasn't just failing to climb a tree, he was actively demolishing it. The base of the trunk looked like it had been hit with a salvo of explosive tags. Kakashi finally dropped down, a thoughtful, worried look in his eye. This is a problem, he murmured, more to himself than to Naruto. Your reserves are massive, far larger than mine, but they're also chaotic. Trying to use standard control methods on you is like trying to build a watch with a sledgehammer. He placed a hand on Naruto's shoulder. Don't think of it as controlling the flow. You can't dam that river. Think of it as giving it a purpose, a direction. It's a battle of will, Naruto. You have to convince the storm inside you to flow where you want it to. It has to be an act of command, not suppression. Naruto looked at the battered tree, then at his own hands. An act of command. The words resonated with him, echoing the voice from his dreams. He nodded slowly. He would not be defeated by a tree. That evening, as the moon cast long shadows through the forest, Sasuke found him. Naruto was still at it, his clothes torn, his body bruised, standing before the horribly scarred tree. He had dismissed his teammates' advice and Kakashi's pity. This was a battle he had to win alone. What are you? Sasuke's voice was low and cold, cutting through the quiet sounds of the night. He stepped out of the shadows, his dark eyes fixed on Naruto, burning with an intensity that was no longer just rivalry. It was a desperate, almost fearful need for an explanation. I saw it, Sasuke continued, his fists clenched. During the fight, your eyes, they weren't blue, and that power you used to break the prison, that wasn't ninjutsu. It wasn't the fox's chakra. I've seen Jinchuriki lose control. That wasn't it. You were in complete command. So I'll ask you again. What are you? Naruto stopped, turning slowly to face him. The moonlight painted half his face in silver, leaving the other in shadow. His expression was unreadable. He could have told him. He could have invented a lie. But instinct, the warrior's instinct that guided his every move, told him that the truth was a weapon, and one did not hand a weapon to someone they did not trust. And he knew, with absolute certainty, Sasuke Uchiha could not be trusted with this. Not yet. I am Naruto Uzumaki, a shinobi of the Hidden Leaf, he said, his voice even and calm. And for the duration of this mission, I am your teammate. That is all you need to know to accomplish the objective. He turned his back on Sasuke, a clear dismissal, and placed his foot against the tree again. The unspoken message was clear. I am not your concern. The mission is your concern. Sasuke stood there for a long moment, trembling with a frustration so profound it was almost a physical pain. He was the last of the Uchiha, a genius, destined for greatness. And he was being stonewalled by the one person he'd always considered to be beneath his notice. He turned and stormed away, the encounter having answered nothing and ignited 1,000 new, burning questions. Naruto ignored his departure. He placed his hands on the rough bark of the tree, feeling its solid, living presence. He closed his eyes and reached inward again. This time, he didn't try to pull a thread from the storm. He addressed the storm itself. Flow. It was not a request. It was a command, a declaration of will, a general ordering his army. He felt the raging torrent of energy within him pause, as if surprised. Then, slowly, grudgingly, a single, powerful current separated from the maelstrom and flowed down his legs, pooling in the soles of his feet. It was still immense, still powerful enough to level a building, but it was contained. Directed. He took a step. His foot landed on the trunk of the tree. And it stuck. There was no explosion, no crater, just the solid, satisfying thud of his foot adhering to the wood. He took another step, then another. He walked a dozen feet up the trunk and stopped, his body parallel to the ground, the force holding him there steady and strong. As he stood there, suspended between heaven and earth, he felt it again. A faint, chilling whisper from the edge of the world. It wasn't the brazen, challenging roar of his dream brother. This was a different presence. Colder, more subtle. It felt like the scrape of a key in a lock, the whisper of a secret in a dead man's ear. It was a calculating, observant power, and for a fleeting moment, he felt its gaze pass over this small, insignificant island nation. The presence was gone as quickly as it came, but it left behind a cold certainty. Gato, Zabuza, the Nd of waves, they were not the whole story. They were merely the surface layer of a conflict far deeper and more ancient than any shinobi could comprehend. Naruto looked back toward Tezuna's house, a small beacon of light in the sleeping darkness. He saw the face of the small boy, Inari, twisted with a despair so complete it was a physical force. The boy had given up because his hero had died. He believed that fighting back was pointless. Naruto understood. A soldier did not fight for glory, or for the admiration of others. A hero was a fragile concept. A soldier fought for the objective. He fought because the alternative was to surrender the field to the enemy. And surrender was not in his blood. He took another step up the tree, his purpose clear, his will forged into a weapon. The TTLE for the bridge was not just a mission. It was a war against despair. And he would win. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Price of a Bridge. The week that followed was a crucible. Kakashi, still recovering, became a relentless taskmaster. A forge master determined to hammer the flawed metal of his team into something that might not shatter on the anvil of Zabuza's blade. The tree climbing exercise was the foundation, the grueling, repetitive first step in reforging their understanding of chakra. Sakura, to her own surprise, excelled. Her naturally precise, if small, reserves were perfectly suited to the task. She mastered tree climbing in a day, and by the third day, she was walking across the surface of the river, her concentration absolute. She became the team's unofficial expert on control, offering advice to Sasuke with an academic's precision, which he accepted with grudging silence. She tried to help Naruto, too, explaining the theory of chakra flow, but her words were like describing color to a man born blind. His problem wasn't theory, it was scale. Sasuke attacked the training with a furious, obsessive energy. Every upward step on the tree trunk was a strike against his own weakness. Every slip, every loss of balance, was a fresh taste of the humiliation he'd felt at Zabuza's hands. He mastered the tree on the second day and moved to the river, his competitive fire burning so brightly it was almost a physical heat. He wasn't just trying to learn. He was trying to catch up to an impossible specter, to the shadow Naruto had cast. He'd glance over from his own training, see the raw destruction of Naruto's early attempts, and a sliver of his old arrogance would return, only to be shattered when he saw Naruto trying again, and again, his determination a force of nature in itself. Naruto's training was not a study in finesse. It was a war of attrition against himself. The first 2 days were a symphony of destruction, the base of his chosen tree a cratered, splintered ruin. He didn't rest. He didn't eat with the others. He'd grab a ration bar, devour it in 3 bites, and return to his battle. He was bruised, scraped, and utterly exhausted, but he did not stop. On the night of the second day, after Sasuke had left him in the moonlit clearing, he finally broke through. The act of command, the sheer, indomitable will to force the hurricane inside him to obey, had worked. When his foot stuck to the bark, solid and firm, a quiet, grim satisfaction settled over him. It was not joy, it was the feeling of a weapon being properly seated in its grip. From that moment on, his progress was terrifying. He didn't just climb the tree. He ran up it. He would sprint up the 100-foot trunk, leap to another tree 50 feet away, land on its side without losing momentum, and sprint back down. He began adding weight, hoisting massive boulders onto his back that would have crushed a normal man, and performing the same exercises, his command over his chakra the only thing keeping him adhered to the bark. Sasuke and Sakura would watch, their own impressive progress suddenly feeling like children's games. He wasn't training ninjutsu anymore. He was forging his body into a living weapon, using the chakra control exercise as the whetstone. The war inside him was quiet, but it was not silent. During a particularly grueling ascent, carrying a rock the size of a small carriage, his vision had wavered. The green forest of the land of waves dissolved, replaced for a single, searing heartbeat by a vision of polished bronze and obsidian. He was looking down from a great height, through eyes that were not his own, at a vast, star-flecked map laid out on a table of black stone. Armored figures, their faces hidden in shadow, moved pieces across the map, their gestures grand and sweeping. The stain in the mortal realm grows bold, a voice like grinding glaciers had echoed in the vast hall. It was not the challenging roar of his dream brother, but a colder, more calculating voice. It draws attention, an unforeseen variable in the grand design. It is of no consequence. Another voice, the familiar, tectonic rumble of his brother, had answered from across the table. I will attend to the matter personally. I will scour our father's shame from the tapestry of creation. The vision vanished, leaving Naruto gasping for breath, the immense boulder still on his back. His feet still firmly planted on the side of the tree. The sweat on his skin was cold. They were watching him. His every action, every surge of his unique power, sent a ripple across a pond he hadn't known existed. This small, insignificant battle in a land of mist and sorrow was a blip on a celestial war map. It made the stakes both impossibly large and terrifyingly small. It was on the 5th day that the fragile piece of their training was shattered. They were at the river's edge, Sakura and Sasuke practicing their water walking, Naruto methodically submerging himself completely, attempting to use the same chakra principle to cling to the riverbed against the powerful current. The boy, Inari, had sought them out. He stood on the bank, his small arms crossed, his face a mask of bitter contempt. Still playing ninja, he scoffed, his voice dripping with a world-weary cynicism that was grotesque in a child. You're wasting your time. When Zabuza comes back, he'll kill you all. Then Gato's men will come. They're monsters. He kicked at a loose stone, his small body trembling with a rage born of absolute despair. You talk about fighting. You don't know anything. My father, everyone in town called him a hero. He stood up to Gato. He tried to drive him out. Inari's voice cracked, the dam of his carefully constructed cynicism breaking. And they killed him for it. They caught him and they crucified him in the town square as an example. They made the whole town watch, even me. That's what happens to heroes. They die, and nothing changes. Sakura gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Sasuke looked away, the story hitting a little too close to the bone of his own family's slaughter. Naruto rose from the river, water streaming from his hair and clothes. He walked onto the bank, his expression unreadable, and stood before the small, trembling boy. He did not offer comfort. He did not offer pity. He offered a soldier's truth. Your father was not a hero, Naruto said, his voice quiet but carrying an immense weight. Inari's head snapped up, his eyes blazing with fury and grief. What did you say? Take that back. He was a hero. No, Naruto repeated, his gaze unwavering. A hero is a story they tell children. A symbol, and symbols can be broken, just like your father was, to spread fear. Your father was a soldier. He saw an enemy occupying his home, and he took up arms to defend it. In war, soldiers die. It is the nature of the conflict. He knelt, bringing himself down to the boy's level, but his eyes held none of the softness of an adult comforting a child. They held the cold clarity of a battlefield commander. His death was not the end of the story. It was a lost battle. It doesn't make the war meaningless. It just means the war isn't over. Inari stared, speechless. He had expected platitudes, or boasts, or a promise that everything would be okay. He did not expect this cold, brutal reframing of his father's sacrifice. It didn't lessen it. In a strange, terrifying way, it made it heavier. It turned his father from a failed symbol into a fallen combatant in an ongoing struggle. You can stand here and cry because a soldier fell, Naruto continued, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. Or you can pick up his weapon and continue the fight. The choice is yours, but do not dishonor his death by calling it pointless. He stood up, turned his back on the stunned child, and walked back toward the river. The training was not complete. The attack came at dusk. Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura were pushing themselves through one final grueling hour of training when Naruto suddenly froze, his head snapping up. What is it? Sasuke asked, breathing heavily. Naruto didn't answer. He was listening, not with his ears, but with the primal sense that was his birthright. He felt it, a disturbance, the sharp, acrid scent of fear from the direction of the house. The sound of a woman's muffled cry, not carried on the wind, but felt as a vibration in the web of the world. The objective is under threat, Naruto said, his voice flat and cold. He shot out of the clearing, not running, but flowing through the trees with a speed that left the other two in his dust. The time for training was over. They arrived to a scene of calculated cruelty. Two samurai, not shinobi, but thugs for hire, stood in the main room of Tezuna's house. They were large, brutish men, their armor cheap and dented, their swords long and sharp. One of them held Tsunami, his arm wrapped around her throat, a short blade pressed against her cheek. The other stood over a kneeling Tezuna, his sword resting casually on the bridge builder's shoulder. Inari was there, backed into a corner, his face white with a terror so profound it had stolen his voice. You see, bridge builder. The man holding Tsunami sneered. This is the price of defiance. Gato-sama is getting impatient. He thought a little. Encouragement was in order. First, we'll take your daughter. Then, perhaps, the boy. Please, leave them alone, Tezuna begged, his voice hoarse. I'll stop the bridge. I'll do whatever you want. It's too late for that, the samurai chuckled. He pressed the blade harder, drawing a thin line of blood on Tsunami's cheek. Gato-sama wants to make an example. That was when Naruto entered. He didn't burst through the door. He simply appeared in the entryway, a silent, dripping specter framed against the twilight. Sasuke and Sakura were right behind him, fanning out, their hands already on their weapons. The samurai holding Tsunami laughed. More brats. What is this, a nursery? His partner, the one standing over Tezuna, turned to face the new threat. I'll handle them. You finish with the woman. He charged, his longsword raised. A battle cry on his lips. Sasuke met the charge. He was faster now, his movements honed by a week of relentless work. He deflected the heavy sword with his kunai, the screech of metal on metal filling the room. He was holding his own, but the samurai had reach and brute strength on his side. The other thug, the one holding Tsunami, grinned and raised his short blade, preparing to silence her permanently. Inari let out a choked, terrified sob. He never made the strike. Naruto moved. He didn't use a substitution or a fancy jutsu. He used his newfound chakra control as a propulsion system. He pushed off the floor with a controlled explosion of force, covering the 20 feet between them in a literal blur. He arrived inside the samurai's guard before the man's brain could even register his movement. The thug's eyes widened in shock. Naruto's right hand, open and rigid, shot forward. It wasn't a slap or a punch. It was a precision strike. His fingers connected with the man's throat. Just above the collarbone, there was a sickening, wet crunch as the man's trachea and larynx collapsed under the force of the blow. The short blade fell from his nerveless fingers. His hands flew to his throat as he made a horrible, gagging sound, his face turning a dark, purplish red. He stumbled back, away from Tsunami, and collapsed, his body convulsing as he asphyxiated on the floor. It was brutally, terrifyingly efficient. The other samurai, locked in combat with Sasuke, heard his partner's death rattle. He made the fatal mistake of glancing away from his opponent for a fraction of a second. It was all the opening Naruto needed. Naruto was already moving, flowing around the fight between Sasuke and the samurai. The remaining thug saw him coming, a silent demon of vengeance, and tried to bring his sword around. He was too slow. Naruto's left hand shot out and clamped down on the man's sword arm, just below the elbow. The coppery aura of his lineage flared for a split second. A barely visible shimmer of power. He didn't just stop the arm. He shattered it. The sound of the radius and ulna snapping was sickeningly loud in the small room. The samurai screamed, a high, thin sound of pure agony, his sword clattering to the floor. The scream was cut short as Naruto's right fist, a blur of motion, connected with the side of the man's head. Not a knockout blow, a disabling one. The man's eyes rolled back and he collapsed, unconscious before he hit the ground. Silence. The entire fight had lasted less than 10 seconds. Sasuke stood breathing heavily, his kunai still raised, staring at the carnage. Sakura was frozen by the door, her face pale. Tsunami was slumped against the wall, trembling, while Tazuna stared, his mouth agape. Inari looked at the two broken men on the floor, at his terrified mother, and then at Naruto. The boy stood over the twitching, dying samurai, his body dripping water onto the wooden floorboards. There was no triumph on his face. No anger. Just the calm, dispassionate focus of a soldier who had neutralized an immediate threat. This was violence. It was brutal and ugly. But it wasn't the cruel, gloating violence of Gado's men. It was the swift, necessary, and terrifying violence of a protector. It was the price of safety. It was the answer to his despair. Naruto's words from the riverbank echoed in his mind. It just means the war isn't over. For the first time, Inari didn't feel helpless. He felt a tiny, fragile seed of something he hadn't felt since his father died. Hope. It was a terrifying, painful thing, but it was there. Naruto turned, his gaze sweeping over the family, ensuring the asset was secure. His eyes met Inari's. He offered no smile, no words of comfort. His steady, unwavering gaze was a statement in itself. This is the cost. This is what it takes to win. Just then, Kakashi appeared in the doorway, a step too late. He took in the scene at a glance, the dead samurai, the one with the shattered arm. His 3 students standing amidst the aftermath, and the wide, shocked eyes of the family they were sworn to protect. His gaze lingered on Naruto, and a deep, troubled sigh escaped his lips. He was not just training a team of shinobi. He was unleashing a force of nature, and he could only pray it was a force for their side. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Bridge of Heroes. The 2 bodies were removed before the blood could stain the floorboards. Naruto had carried them out himself, his movements efficient and impersonal, and left them deep in the woods for the scavengers. He had returned to the house, washed the blood from his hands in a basin of cold water, and taken up a watch post on the roof, a silent gargoyle against the pale moon. He did not speak of what he had done. There was nothing to say. A threat had been neutralized. The objective was secure. The tactical log was closed. Downstairs, the atmosphere was thick with the ghosts of the violence. Tsunami moved with a quiet, deliberate purpose. Cleaning a spill here, straightening a cushion there, her hands never still, as if the simple act of restoring order could erase the memory of a man dying on her floor. Tazuna sat at his table, a bottle of sake untouched before him, his gaze lost in the grain of the wood. The cost of his dream, of his bridge, had been laid bare in the most brutal fashion, and the weight of it seemed to press down on his old shoulders. Inari was the most changed. The sneering, cynical mask was gone, shattered. He sat in a corner, watching the stairs that led to the roof where Naruto kept his vigil. He did not cry, he just watched, his young face a complicated mixture of terror and a dawning, terrible awe. He had seen the price of defiance, and then he had seen the price of protection. They were both paid in blood. Team 7 was a fractured, silent unit. Sakura had retreated into herself, the reality of their profession a cold, heavy stone in her stomach. She diligently practiced her chakra control, her focus absolute, as if the mastery of a single jutsu could build a wall high enough to keep the horrors at bay. Sasuke was a storm cloud of repressed fury. He drove himself past the point of exhaustion in his training, his every movement laced with a desperate, frantic edge. He had been a bystander in his own battle. Naruto had ended the fight in seconds, while he had been locked in a pointless stalemate. He would look up at Naruto on the roof, a dark, motionless silhouette, and the questions would burn in his mind. What are you? What is this power you hide? He saw Naruto not as a teammate, not even as a rival, but as a living testament to his own inadequacy, a riddle he had to solve or be consumed by. Naruto, for his part, seemed unaffected. He ate, he trained, he stood his watch. He moved through the tense silence of the house like a stone through water, causing ripples but remaining unchanged himself. But inside, the war was not quiet. The spurs from the other realm were growing more frequent, flashes of bronze armor and star maps bleeding into the corners of his vision. He felt the cold, calculating gaze of the one and the hot, impatient glare of the other. They were watching, waiting, judging, and the pressure of that celestial scrutiny was a forge, burning away the last vestiges of the boy he might have been and tempering the warrior he was born to be. On the morning of the 7th day, the mist returned. It did not roll in from the sea. It materialized, a sudden, clammy blanket that swallowed the sun and muffled the world in a shroud of gray. It was a declaration of war. Kakashi, now fully recovered, stood on the porch, his hand on his uncovered Sharingan. They're here, he said, his voice grim. They're on the bridge. Chizuna's face went white. Then, it's over. No, Naruto said, dropping silently from the roof to land beside his sensei. He was already geared for battle, his pouches full, his expression calm. It's beginning. He looked at his team. Sasuke, Sakura. Our objective is the protection of the client. The enemy's primary target is the client. The bridge is the strategic nexus. They will force a confrontation there. So what's the plan? Sakura asked, her voice tight with fear. The plan is simple, Naruto said, his gaze sweeping over them, cold and absolute. We will be the wall upon which they break. Kakashi-sensei will engage Zabuza. He is the only one who can match him. Sasuke, you and I will handle the partner, the hunter Nin. Sakura, you are on client protection. Your chakra control is the most precise. You will create diversions, set traps, and analyze the battlefield from a secure position. Your primary duty is to keep Chizuna alive. Do not engage. Do not get drawn in. Is that clear? He delivered the orders with the unshakable authority of a seasoned commander. Sakura, despite her fear, found herself nodding. Sasuke gritted his teeth, hating that the plan was tactically sound. Hating that it came from Naruto, but he gave a curt, angry nod of his own. Let's go, Kakashi said, and led them out into the mist. The bridge was a skeleton of wood and steel, stretching out into a gray void. The mist was so thick they could barely see 50 feet ahead. The only sounds were the creak of the planks under their feet and the distant, mournful cry of a sea bird. They found them in the center of the bridge. Zabuza stood with his massive executioner's blade resting on his shoulder, a demonic grin plastered on his bandaged face. Beside him stood the hunter Nin, a silent, graceful figure radiating an aura of profound, chilling cold. So, you came, Zabuza rumbled, his voice echoing in the mist. I was hoping you would, Kakashi. We have a score to settle. But this time, I won't be caught off guard by your little pet. His eyes flickered toward Naruto, a flicker of something that might have been respect, or perhaps just professional curiosity. Haku, Zabuza said, not taking his eyes off Kakashi. You take the other two. I want the Uchiha. His eyes will make a fine addition to my collection. The other one, you can kill him. The hunter Nin, Haku, bowed his head. As you wish, Zabuza-sama. Naruto, Sasuke, you know your roles, Kakashi said, his voice low. Don't underestimate him. That hunter Nin is more dangerous than he looks. With a roar, Zabuza charged, his massive blade swinging. Kakashi met him head-on, kunai flashing against the executioner's blade. The two Jonin became a whirlwind of steel and killing intent, their battle a furious storm that vanished into the deeper mist. The clang of their weapons a violent percussion to the unfolding drama. Haku moved toward them, his steps silent on the wooden planks. So, Sasuke said, stepping forward. His voice a low growl of anticipation. I'm the one you want. His hand was already a blur, a fan of shuriken slicing through the air. Haku deflected them with a casual flick of his wrist. A single Senbon needle knocking each one from the air. He moved with a liquid grace, a dancer in a deadly ballet. I do not wish to kill you, he said, his voice soft, melodic. But if you stand in Zabuza-sama's way, I will have no choice. He flashed through a series of one-handed seals. Secret jutsu. 1,000 needles of death. The water at the base of the bridge pylons erupted, coalescing into 1,000 sharp, deadly needles of ice, all of them aimed at Sasuke. Sasuke! Sakura screamed from her position near Tazuna. Before the needles could find their mark, Naruto was there. He moved in a blur, tackling Sasuke and driving him to the ground as the volley of ice whistled over their heads, embedding themselves deep in the bridge's framework. His target is you, Uchiha, Naruto said. His voice a low growl as he pushed himself up. Your eyes. You are the priority asset. Do not be reckless. I don't need you to protect me. Sasuke snarled, shoving him away. But Haku was already moving again. His speed supernatural. He appeared between them, a Senbon needle in each hand. Sasuke reacted with instinct, but Haku was faster, striking a dozen pressure points on Sasuke's bod. Why before the Uchiha could even raise a defense? Sasuke cried out, his body seizing up as his own nervous system was turned against him. Naruto attacked, his fist a coppery blur. Haku flowed backward, avoiding the strike with an impossible grace. He was like the mist itself, formless and untouchable. You are fast, Haku noted, his masked face turning to Naruto. But you are all heat and fury. A fire in a storm. Easy to redirect. His hands flashed through another series of seals. The air around them dropped 20 degrees. The moisture in the mist began to crystallize, forming vast, perfectly smooth mirrors of ice. They rose from the bridge, surrounding Naruto and the paralyzed Sasuke, linking together to form a dome of shimmering, crystalline death. Secret jutsu. Demonic mirroring ice crystals. They were trapped. Haku stepped into one of the mirrors, his reflection appearing in all of them simultaneously. He was everywhere at once. Now, Haku's voice echoed from all directions, let's begin. A volley of Senbon needles shot from every mirror at once. There was no escape. Naruto grabbed Sasuke, shielding the Uchiha's body with his own as the needles peppered his back. They stung, piercing his jacket and skin. But his unnatural resilience, the gift of his lineage, prevented them from penetrating too deeply. What is this jutsu? Sasuke grunted, his body slowly regaining feeling. Akeke Genkai. Naruto answered, his eyes scanning the dome of mirrors, processing, analyzing. He's using the reflections to travel between the mirrors at near instantaneous speed. We're not fighting one opponent. We're fighting a dozen. So we break the mirrors, Sasuke said, forcing himself to his feet. He channeled chakra, his hands flying through the seals for the fireball jutsu. A massive sphere of flame erupted from his lips, slamming into one of the mirrors. The ice glowed red-hot, but it did not melt. It absorbed the heat, the surface steaming for a moment before returning to its pristine state. It's useless, Haku's voice echoed, tinged with something like pity. My mirrors are shielded against such simple attacks. Another volley of needles shot out, faster this time. Naruto and Sasuke were forced to dodge, the enclosed space turning the battle into a deadly cage match. For every needle they avoided, two more seemed to take its place. They were being systematically worn down. Sasuke was getting desperate. He could see Haku's movements, but they were too fast, coming from too many directions at once. Then, he saw it. A flicker of movement in his peripheral vision. A single Haku, the real one, preparing to throw a volley aimed at Naruto's exposed back. Something inside Sasuke snapped. The humiliation, the rage, the burning need to prove himself, it all coalesced into a single, white-hot point of focus. He would not be protected again. He would not be the liability. His vision sharpened. The world, which had been a blur of silver and blue, suddenly snapped into a state of hyper-focus. He could see the individual needles in Haku's hand. He could see the subtle shift of muscle in his arm as he prepared to throw. He could see the flow of chakra, a visible, swirling blue aura around the hunter nin. Two black tomo spun into existence in his crimson eyes. The Sharingan. It was awake. I can see you, Sasuke whispered, a manic grin spreading across his face. He moved, intercepting the needles meant for Naruto, deflecting them with his kunai. His movements were still not as fast as Haku's, but now he could predict. He could see the attack before it was launched. The Sharingan, Haku's voice echoed, a note of genuine surprise in it for the first time. So the rumors were true. You truly are of that clan. The battle shifted. Sasuke, empowered by his new vision, became a whirlwind of defense, blocking and parrying, his movements growing more confident, more precise with every passing second. He was a genius, and the Sharingan was the key that had unlocked his potential. Naruto watched, providing support, his mind analyzing the new dynamic. Sasuke's awakening had changed the tactical calculus, but it wasn't enough. They were still on the defensive. They were still trapped. Haku was simply too fast. You were remarkable, Haku's voice said, and this time there was a chilling finality to it. Which is why I cannot allow you to live. The reflections in the mirrors all moved at once. They all targeted Sasuke. Haku had identified him as the greater threat. 100 needles from 100 directions, all aimed at the last Uchiha. There was no way to block them all. Sasuke's eyes went wide as he saw the inescapable web of death converging on him. He was going to die. And then, Naruto was there. In the fraction of a second that Sasuke was frozen, Naruto moved. He didn't try to block. He didn't try to dodge. He simply put himself between Sasuke and the attack. A living shield. Sasuke saw it happen in the surreal slow motion of his Sharingan. He saw Naruto's back arch as dozens of needles slammed into him. He saw the look of calm, tactical certainty on Naruto's face. He saw him turn his head, just slightly. Objective is paramount. Naruto grunted, a trickle of blood leaking from the corner of his mouth. Then, his eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed face down on the bridge. The world went silent. Sasuke stared at Naruto's still, unmoving body, riddled with needles. He looked at the growing pool of blood spreading out from under him. He looked at the needles protruding from his back, his neck, his legs. It was a fatal blow. It had to be. He had done it again. He had frozen. And Naruto, the dead last, the idiot, the one he had sworn to surpass, had died protecting him. Something inside Sasuke Uchiha broke. And something inside Naruto Uzumaki woke up. The first sign was the chakra. It was not the slow leak of a dying shinobi. It was a volcanic eruption. A wave of raw, malevolent power. So vast and so hateful it cracked the very ice of Haku's mirrors. The air shimmered with a blistering, orange-red heat. Haku staggered back, his reflections flickering. What is this power? Naruto's body began to rise from the ground, lifted by the sheer pressure of the chakra emanating from him. The needles were pushed out of his skin, his wounds steaming and sealing shut with an audible hiss. He floated for a moment, his head bowed, his blonde hair obscuring his face. Then, his head snapped up. His eyes were no longer blue. They were the slitted, demonic crimson of the nine-tailed fox. His teeth had elongated into fangs, his nails into claws. A cloak of boiling red chakra, shaped like a fox with a single, lashing tail, enveloped him. But that wasn't all. Woven through the chaotic, churning red of the Kyuubi's cloak was another power. A faint, shimmering aura the color of cooling bronze, of old blood. It was a razor-thin corona that gave the demonic chakra a terrifying, disciplined shape. His slitted eyes held not just the blind rage of a beast, but a cold, tactical fury. It was the rage of a cornered animal, being wielded with the precision of a master swordsman. It was the power of the demon fox, being commanded by the will of a war god. I'm going to kill you, Naruto snarled, his voice a horrifying, layered chorus of his own and a deep, guttural roar that was not human. He didn't charge. He exploded. He moved so fast that Sasuke's newly awakened Sharingan could barely track him. He appeared before one of the mirrors and drew back his fist. The combined red and bronze chakra converged on his knuckles. He punched the mirror. The impact didn't just shatter it. It annihilated it. The mirror didn't break into pieces. It vaporized in a Florida shish of light and a concussive blast that shook the entire bridge. Haku cried out in pain, his reflection in another mirror flickering as if struck. Naruto was already at the next mirror. And the next. Each punch was a detonation. A display of overwhelming, focused power that defied all laws of ninjutsu. He wasn't just breaking the prison. He was systematically executing every piece of it. Haku, reeling from the feedback of his jutsu being destroyed, appeared from the final, cracking mirror, his mask broken, revealing a face of startling, androgynous beauty. He looked at the monster before him, a creature of myth and legend. And he knew he was defeated. Naruto appeared before him, his clawed hand raised, the chaotic energy swirling around it. He was going to tear him apart. Please, stop, Sasuke croaked, stumbling forward. He's beaten. Naruto paused, his slitted eyes turning to Sasuke. For a moment, it seemed he didn't even recognize him. Then, some semblance of the boy within the storm seemed to surface. The killing intent receded, just slightly. He looked down at the defeated Haku, who was looking not at him, but past him, into the mist where the sounds of Zabuza's battle were still raging. Why? Naruto growled, his voice still a demonic chorus. Why do you protect him? He was the first person to see me as something other than a monster, Haku whispered, his eyes filling with tears. He gave me a purpose. A dream. To be his tool, his weapon. That is my only reason for living. The words struck a chord deep within Naruto. A weapon. A tool. Someone who lived only for another. He saw his own reflection in Haku's devotion. And he saw the hollowness of it. The demonic chakra around him began to recede, the bronze aura fading, the red cloak sinking back into his skin. His eyes returned to their normal blue, though they were cold and hard as glacial ice. To live only for someone else, Naruto said, his voice his own again, but stripped of all warmth. That is not a dream. It is a cage. Before he could say more, he felt a massive surge of chakra from the end of the bridge. Zabuza. He had been defeated. Kakashi's lightning blade had found its mark. At that exact moment, a slow, mocking clap echoed through the mist. A short, fat man in an expensive suit, flanked by 100 armed thugs and mercenaries, stepped onto the bridge. It was Gato. Bravo, bravo, Gato sneered, a cigarillo clamped in his teeth. What a show, but I'm afraid I won't be paying you, demon. Hiring ninja is so expensive. It's much cheaper to just kill them when the job is done. Get them. Zabuza, bleeding heavily from a wound in his chest, looked at the army of thugs, then at the defeated Haku. He looked at Gato, and his eyes, for the first time, showed something other than bloodlust. They showed weariness. Haku, seeing Zabuza in danger, did the only thing he knew how to do. He acted as a tool. He flickered, appearing in front of Zabuza just as Kakashi to live. What would have been the final blow, taking the lightning blade meant for his master through his own heart. Haku smiled, a bloody, peaceful smile, and collapsed. Gato laughed. What a fool. Died for nothing. He walked over to Haku's body and, with a casual, contemptuous motion, kicked him in the head. And in that moment, the demon of the hidden mist wept. Silent tears streamed from his eyes, tracing paths through the blood and grime on his face. Kid, Zabuza said, his voice a ragged whisper, not looking at Naruto but at the boy who had just lectured his most precious person. Your words, they cut me deeper than any sword. He tore the bandages from his mouth, revealing a jaw full of shark-like teeth. He snatched a kunai from Kakashi's pouch. Lend me this. He turned and faced the army of thugs. He was one man, grievously wounded, against 100. And he smiled a true, terrifying demon smile. He charged. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of death. He moved through Gato's men. The kunai in his mouth a blur of motion, slitting throats, severing arteries. Swords and spears pierced his back, his legs, his arms, but he did not stop. He was no longer fighting for money or for a mission. He was fighting for the honor of the boy who had given his life for him. He reached Gato, who screamed in terror. Zabuza drove the kunai deep into the tyrant's chest, and they both fell from the side of the bridge. Their bodies plummeting into the churning water below. The mercenaries, their leader gone, faltered. And then, a new sound was heard. A roar. From the end of the bridge, a crowd of people appeared. Armed with axes, hammers, fishing hooks, and courage. At their head was a small boy, holding a fishing spear, his face streaked with tears but his eyes burning wit. A fire that had been lit by a warrior's words. Inari. The thugs, caught between the terrifying shinobi and an angry mob, broke and fled. Silence fell upon the bridge. The mist began to part, and for the first time in weeks, the sun shone down on the land of waves. Kakashi, using the last of his strength, pulled Zabuza's body from the water. The demon was still alive, barely. He lay on the bridge, his life's blood pooling beneath him. Kid, Zabuza rasped, looking at Naruto. Take me to him. Naruto nodded. He lifted the dying man and carried him to Haku's side. Snow began to fall, a freak, unseasonable occurrence. As if the sky itself were weeping. Haku, Zabuza whispered, reaching out a trembling hand to touch the boy's cheek. Is it you, who is crying? He looked up at the sky. All my life, I have been used. And I have used you. I see now, that we are going to the same place, you and I. His hand fell, and the demon of the hidden mist was no more. Naruto stood and looked out at the vast, unfinished bridge. At the hopeful faces of the townspeople, at his exhausted, wounded teammates. The mission was over. The client was safe. They had won. But as he stood there, the echoes of the battle fading, he felt the cold touch of the celestial gaze upon him once more. A silent judgment, a silent warning. This battle was over. But the war, the real war, had only just begun. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Scars of Victory. The sun that burned away the mist did not bring warmth. It brought a harsh, clinical light that exposed the grim tableau on the bridge. The bodies of Gato's thugs were scattered like broken dolls, a testament to a demon's final, desperate charge. The air, scrubbed clean of the fog, was now thick with the cloying, metallic scent of blood. Victory felt less like a triumph and more like the quiet, aching exhaustion after a fever breaks. Kakashi, with a solemnity that stripped away all his lazy affectations, declared that Zabuza Momochi and Haku would be buried as shinobi. It was a gesture of respect for a fallen adversary, a warrior's creed that transcended village loyalties. Sasuke and Sakura helped gather wood for a pyre, their movements stiff and disconnected. Their faces pale masks of shock. They were children who had been forced to look into the abyss, and the abyss had stared back. Naruto stood apart, watching the townspeople, led by Tazuna, begin the grim work of clearing their new bridge. He had carried Zabuza to a patch of earth beside Haku, laying them out side by side. He did not see a monster in his tool. He saw a commander and his most loyal soldier. He understood their bond in a way his teammates, who were grappling with the horror of it, could not. It was a battlefield covenant, a bond forged in the certainty that one would die for the other. It was a language his blood understood perfectly. Inari approached him, his small hands clasped behind his back. The boy's eyes were still red-rimmed from his tears, but the bitter despair was gone. Replaced by a fragile, tentative resolve. They called him a demon, Inari said, his voice quiet, looking at Zabuza's still form. He was, Naruto replied without inflection. And he was a warrior. The two are not mutually exclusive. Are you a demon? Inari asked, his gaze flicking up to meet Naruto's. It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine question. He had seen the red chakra, the fangs. The terrifying power that had annihilated the ice mirrors. Naruto considered the question with a seriousness that gave the boy's query immense weight. I am a weapon, he said finally. And a weapon is defined by its wielder. Today, I was a weapon for the land of waves. He looked down at the boy, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than tactical assessment entered his eyes. Your father was a weapon for this land, too. The difference between a demon and a hero is sometimes just a matter of which side of the blade you're on. He turned and walked away, leaving the boy to ponder a truth that was far older and heavier than the bridge they stood upon. The funeral pyre burned as the sun began to set, casting long, dancing shadows. Team 7 stood in silence, watching the flames consume the two bodies, sending sparks and ash into the twilight sky. Kakashi's single eye was closed, his head bowed. Sakura wept silently, for Haku, for the tragedy of a life spent as a tool. Sasuke stared into the fire, his new Sharingan burning behind his eyelids, the tomo spinning as he replayed Naruto's death over and over again. It was a brand, a scar on his soul, a constant reminder that his power had awakened not in a moment of triumph, but in a moment of utter failure and dependence. When the last embers died down, Tazuna approached them. The work on the bridge was nearly complete. The final planks being laid by a town now united in purpose. We don't know how to thank you, the old man said, his voice thick with emotion. He bowed low, a deep, humbling gesture. You have given us back our home. Our future. He straightened, a proud, watery smile on his face. We have decided to name the bridge. We want to call it, the Great Naruto Bridge, so that everyone who crosses it will remember the name of the warrior who fought for them when they could not. Sakura gasped, a small smile touching her lips. It was a great honor. Sasuke's jaw tightened. Naruto's expression did not change. He looked at the vast, sprawling structure, a lifeline of wood and steel. A name is irrelevant, he said, his voice flat. The bridge is a strategic asset. It breaks the siege and secures the economic freedom of the land of waves. Its function is its tribute. Give it a functional name. Tazuna stared, taken aback by the cold, tactical response. He had expected joy, or at least a bashful thanks. He didn't understand that Naruto saw the world not as a place of symbols and honors, but as a map of objectives and assets. The completion of the bridge. Was the successful conclusion of the mission. The name was just useless data. Well, Tazuna stammered, even so, that's what we'll call it. The journey back to Konoha was a silent, tense affair. The vibrant greens of the land of fire seemed muted, the cheerful chatter of birds an intrusion on the heavy quiet that hung over the four shinobi. They moved in a diamond formation, Kakashi at the lead, Naruto at the rear, a perfect professional escort. But the camaraderie of their first journey was gone, replaced by a chasm of unspoken resentments and unanswered questions. On the second night, as they made camp, Sasuke decided he could not bear it any longer. He found Naruto by the edge of a stream, sharpening a kunai with a whetstone, his movements precise and hypnotic. I'm not asking again, Sasuke said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He stepped in front of Naruto, blocking his path. That red chakra. The way you healed, that wasn't you, that was the fox, but the way you used it, you were in control. I saw it with my own eyes. How? Naruto continued to draw the kunai over the stone, the rhythmic scrape the only sound between them. It is a power I have. A tool to be used when the mission requires it. A tool, Sasuke spat, his frustration boiling over. You died, I saw you die, and you came back as that thing. Don't you dare pretend that's normal. Naruto stopped his work. He looked up, his blue eyes as cold and deep as the night sky. Is your Sharingan normal, Uchiha? Is the power to see the future a common skill? We all have our tools. Mine are simply different from yours. That's not an answer. Sasuke's voice rose, cracking with the strain. It is the only answer you will receive, Naruto said, his voice dropping, taking on the hard, sharp edge of command. I am the asset that completed the mission. You are the asset I had to protect to do so. That is the chain of command we operated under. That is all that matters. Your feelings on the matter are irrelevant to our combat effectiveness. He stood up, his presence suddenly immense, far larger than his physical frame. He was no longer the dead last. He was the warrior who had stared down a demon. The soldier who had sacrificed himself for the objective, the commander who had brought them all back alive. And he was looking at Sasuke not as a rival, but as a subordinate. Get some rest, Naruto ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. We move out at first light. He walked past Sasuke, leaving the last Uchiha trembling by the stream, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. The Sharingan spun in his eyes, a mark of power that now felt like a badge of shame. He wanted answers, but more than that, he wanted the power Naruto possessed. He wanted it so badly it was a physical ache, a hollow space in his soul that he knew, with a terrifying certainty, he would do anything to fill. Returning to Konoha was a surreal experience. The bustling streets, the familiar faces, the scent of ramen from Ichiraku's, it was all the same, but they were not. The village looked smaller, the people softer, their concerns petty and insignificant. A lost cat, a noisy neighbor, or, these were the problems of a world they no longer inhabited. They had walked through the valley of the shadow of death, and it had left its mark on them all. Their debriefing in the Hokage's office was a sterile, formal affair. Kakashi stood before Hiruzen Sarutobi, delivering a concise, professional report. He detailed the deception of the mission's rank, the encounters with the demon brothers, and the final battle against Zabuza and Haku. When he spoke of Naruto's role, he chose his words with a surgeon's care. At a critical moment, when the team was trapped and Sasuke was in imminent danger, the Nine Tails chakra manifested in Naruto, Kakashi explained, his tone even. It allowed him to break the enemy's jutsu and overwhelm the opponent. He showed an unusual level of control over the power, directing it with tactical precision before it receded. The third Hokage sat behind his desk, smoke curling from his pipe, his old eyes half closed. He listened without interruption, his gaze fixed not on Kakashi, but on the blonde-haired boy who stood perfectly still, his expression placid. Hiruzen was one of the few people alive who had seen Kushina Uzumaki fight. He knew the volatile, explosive nature of the Kyuubi's rage. What Kakashi described was not that. Tactical precision was not a phrase one associated with a Jinchuriki losing control. When Kakashi finished, the Hokage took a long pull from his pipe. A C rank mission that became an A- rank. You faced an S rank rogue nin and his prodigal apprentice, protected the client, completed the objective, and returned with your entire team alive. A remarkable outcome, Kakashi. You have trained them well. He looked directly at Naruto. Your file states that you are impulsive, academically challenged, and prone to emotional outbursts. Kakashi's report, and your actions, suggest a different person entirely. People change, Lord Hokage, Naruto said simply. Hiruzen's eyes narrowed slightly. Indeed they do. He paused, the silence stretching. Your mother once told me that the greatest battles are not fought on the fields of war, but in the quiet chambers of the heart. You have your father's face, but I wonder, whose heart do you have, Naruto? It was a strange, probing question. Naruto met the old man's gaze, and for a moment, the Hokage saw a flicker of something ancient in the boy's blue eyes, a weary, knowing depth that had no place in a child. I have my own, Naruto replied. The Hokage nodded slowly, a deep, sad wisdom in his expression. So you do. He gestured to the door. You are all dismissed. Take some time to rest. You've earned it. They bowed and left the office, the three genin pointedly not looking at each other as they walked down the hall. They had survived as a team, but they were returning as three separate, isolated individuals. Hiruzen Sarutobi remained, staring at the closed door long after they had gone. He reached into a locked drawer in his desk and pulled out a single, heavily sealed scroll. It was old, the paper yellowed, the ink a faded black. It was addressed to him, in the elegant, precise script of the fourth Hokage. Minato had given it to him the night the Kyuubi attacked, with a single, solemn instruction. Open this only if the seal I placed on my son proves to be incomplete. If he becomes something more, or something other, than just a Jinchuriki. With a trembling hand, the Hokage laid the scroll on his desk. The time, he feared, was rapidly approaching. That night, Naruto did not dream of Zabuza or Haku. He did not dream of the bridge. He was ripped from his sleep and thrown into the heart of his own blood. He stood on the cracked, barren plain under the blood-red sky. The black iron fortress stood silent in the distance. But he was not alone. The figure in the archaic bronze armor was there, his back to Naruto, staring up at the bruised heavens. He seemed larger, his presence more solid, more real than in previous dreams. So, you spilled blood in the mortal realm, the figure rumbled, his voice the grinding of mountains. You played with their little toys of flesh and bone. You called it a victory. He turned, and for the first time, Naruto could see the details of his helmet. It was a grim, Corinthian design, the eye slits two pits of absolute darkness. My name is Phobos, the being said, and the name itself was a weapon. A wave of primal terror that washed over Naruto, seeking to paralyze him, to make his heart stop. I am the terror of the battlefield. The fear that shatters shields and breaks the hearts of men. I am a true son of our father. Naruto stood his ground, the fear a cold, slick thing that he acknowledged, analyzed, and then contained. It was a weapon, and he would not allow it to be used against him. And you, Phobos continued, taking a step forward, the ground shaking with his tread, are a mongrel. An insult, a fleeting spark of our father's blood, diluted by the mud of a mortal womb. He raised a gauntleted hand. and the air between them shimmered. An image appeared, a vision of a battle so vast and terrifying it dwarfed anything Naruto could have conceived. Beings of pure Li, GHT and Shadow clashed in a sea of stars, their weapons sundering nebulae, their war cries echoing in the silent void. It was a war on a scale that made the strife of the elemental nations look like a squabble between ants. This is the true war, little brother, Phobos sneered, the vision vanishing. The eternal conflict, our birthright, and every time you tap into that stolen spark of our father's power, you send up a flare. A beacon in the darkness. The dark eye slits of his helmet seemed to bore into Naruto's soul. You think your only enemies are mortal men. You are a fool. Your light attracts moths, and some of them are far, far older and hungrier than I. Phobos began to fade, his form dissolving like smoke. Continue your little games. Grow strong. Savor your fleeting victories, for I will be coming for you. And when I do, I will show you the true meaning of fear, and I will extinguish your pathetic little light myself. Naruto woke up in his Spartan apartment. The moon was a cold, silver eye in the window. There was no sweat on his brow, no terror in his heart. The dream had not been a nightmare. It had been a mission briefing. Phobos, his brother, a god of fear, he had a name for his enemy now. And he had a purpose. His life in Konoha, his team, his missions, they were not the end goal. They were what Kakashi had called the tree climbing exercise. They were the foundation, a training ground to prepare him for the real war. He looked at his hands, seeing not the flesh of a boy, but the potential of a weapon that was not yet fully forged. He had to get stronger. Not to be acknowledged, not to become Hokage, but to survive the coming of his own blood. The war had a new front, and it was located in the quiet chambers of his own heart. And he would not lose. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Serpent's Shadow. The month following their return from the Land of Waves was a campaign of attrition. Kakashi, perhaps believing that shared misery was the next best thing to shared purpose, ran them through a relentless series of D-rank missions. It was a strategic error. Instead of forging them together, the menial labor only served to highlight the fissures that had fractured their team. They chased the demon cat Tora again. This time, there was no chaotic pursuit. Naruto, with a sigh that was more weariness than frustration, created a single shadow clone to act as a beater, driving the cat from its hiding places along a pre-calculated route. He had laid a simple, non-injurious snare in the only remaining alley. The entire mission was completed in 4 minutes and 37 seconds. He presented the captured animal to the daimyo's wife with the detached air of a soldier delivering a captured enemy standard. Sasuke and Sakura had simply stood and watched, feeling less like teammates and more like superfluous equipment. They weeded gardens, painted fences, and walked ninja hounds. Through it all, Naruto operated with a terrifying, robotic efficiency. He calculated, he executed. He completed the objective. He did not speak unless a tactical observation was necessary. He did not offer help, nor did he ask for it. He was a perfect shinobi, and in his perfection, he was utterly alone. Sakura's trauma from the bridge manifested as a desperate obsession with control. She drilled her chakra exercises until she could stand on the surface of a thimble of water, her focus absolute. She saw Naruto's cold competence not as a strength, but as a pathology, a sign that the monster within had consumed the boy. She tried to bridge the gap to Sasuke, but he was an island, surrounded by a storm of his own making, and he had no intention of letting her make landfall. Sasuke was a man possessed. Every moment was training, every waking thought was self-flagellation for his weakness on the bridge. He would spar with Kakashi for hours, his new Sharingan a blazing, desperate tool, pushing his body to its absolute limit and beyond. He would see Naruto moving through his own training exercises, not practicing jutsu, but performing feats of impossible strength and endurance, his body hardening into something that was no longer entirely human. The rage in his heart would curdle into a cold, venomous jealousy. He was haunted by the memory of Naruto's unmoving body, and the knowledge that his own power had been born from that sacrifice was a debt he could never repay. Only resent. One sweltering afternoon, after a particularly grueling mission that involved cleaning the sludge from the bottom of the public bathhouse, Kakashi gathered them in their usual training ground. "All right, team," he said, his usual lazy tone failing to mask a deeper seriousness. "I've been observing your progress. Your individual skills have grown at an exponential rate." He looked from Sakura's perfect chakra control, to Sasuke's blazing Sharingan, to Naruto's unnerving, silent competence. "But as a team, you are a complete and utter failure." Neither Sasuke nor Naruto reacted. Sakura flinched as if struck. "You don't talk, you don't coordinate, you don't trust one another. You operate as three separate soldiers who just happen to be standing on the same battlefield. In a real conflict, that will get you all killed." He let the words hang in the air, heavy and sharp. "Which is why I've decided to recommend you for the Chunin exams." Sakura gasped. "The Chunin exams? But we're just genin. We're not ready." "You are more than ready in terms of skill," Kakashi countered. "Whether you are ready in terms of spirit, that remains to be seen. This exam is a crucible. It will either force you to melt down and reforge yourselves into a single weapon, or it will shatter you into pieces. Frankly, I don't see any other way forward for the three of you." He handed them the application forms. "It requires the consent of all three members. The choice is yours." He vanished in a swirl of leaves, leaving them in a tense, suffocating silence. Sakura looked at Sasuke, her eyes pleading. "Sasuke-kun, I'll do it," Sasuke said instantly, his voice a low growl. The exams were a chance. A chance to fight, to test his new eyes, to prove to himself, and to Naruto, that he was not weak. He snatched his form and signed it with a sharp, angry stroke. They both looked at Naruto. He stood with his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the distant Hokage monument. The Chunin exams, an assembly of the strongest genin from across the nations. A gathering of potential threats and potential assets. A high-stakes, multi-stage conflict simulation. It was not a test. It was a hunting ground. An opportunity to gauge the strength of this world's warriors, to gather intelligence for the far greater war he knew was coming. "Fine," he said, his voice betraying no emotion. He took the form, signed his name with a precise, clean script, and handed it back to Sakura. He had made his decision not as a teammate, but as a commander assessing a valuable strategic opportunity. The crucible Kakashi spoke of was irrelevant. He was already forged. As the date of the exams approached, Konoha transformed. The familiar streets thronged with foreign ninja. Their different headbands and strange garbs a visual testament to the temporary, fragile truce that governed the event. The air itself felt different, charged with a cocktail of ambition, hostility, and nervous energy. To Naruto, it was a cacophony of new sensory data. He could feel the chakra signatures, hundreds of them, each one a unique thumbprint of power and potential. He felt the arrogant, grating power of the Sand siblings as they entered the village, one of them a seething, unstable vortex of bloodlust and ancient, caged fury that made the Kyuubi in his own gut stir with a low, predatory growl. He felt the quiet, disciplined confidence of the Hyuga prodigy, Neji. He felt 1,000 different currents of strength. But beneath it all, he felt something else. It was a cold, slit, herring presence that moved through the village's underbelly like a serpent through tall grass. It was not a powerful chakra signature in the way Gaara's was. It was ancient, patient, and utterly corrupt. It felt like dry, rustling scales. Like the scent of graveyard dirt and forgotten secrets. It was a fundamentally wrong presence, a discordant note in the symphony of the world that made the divine blood in his veins run cold. He dubbed it, the serpent, in his mind, and he began to track its movements, a silent, secondary mission he assigned only to himself. The first stage of the exam was held in a large, sterile classroom in the academy. Ibiki Morino, the proctor, was a mountain of a man, his face a roadmap of scars, his presence radiating an aura of psychological dominance that could be Rika lesser shinobi before a single word was spoken. He explained the rules of the written test. 10 questions, a point-based system, and a final, 10th question that would be given at the end of the hour. Getting caught cheating 5 times meant disqualification for your entire team. Naruto scanned the test paper. The questions were ludicrously complex, far beyond the scope of any genin curriculum. They covered everything from advanced cryptographic analysis to the precise trajectory calculation of a shuriken thrown in a crosswind of 17 knots. It was impossible, and that was the point. He looked around the room. He saw the panic, the quiet desperation. He saw Sasuke, His eyes closed for a moment, and then they snapped open, the Sharingan's tomo spinning as he calmly began to write. His head angled perfectly to observe the movements of the person in front of him. A simple, effective use of a bloodline limit. He saw Sakura, her brow furrowed, read the first question and then, she began to write. A small, confident smile on her lips. She simply knew the answers. Her academic diligence, so often a point of mockery, had become a formidable weapon. Naruto looked back at his own blank paper. He could try to guess. He could try to create an elaborate cheating scheme. But that was thinking like a student. He needed to think like a soldier. What was the objective? It wasn't to answer the questions. It was to pass the test. Ibiki had laid out the rules, but the true test was in understanding the unspoken objective. This was an intelligence-gathering exercise. They were being tested on their ability to acquire information, by any means necessary, without getting caught. A frontal assault was foolish. Subterfuge was the key. He closed his eyes. He didn't form a hand seal. He didn't mold a massive amount of chakra. He simply reached inward, to the quiet, disciplined core of his own energy, and willed a tiny, almost imperceptible sliver of it to split off. It flowed down his leg, under the floorboards, and traveled across the room. It emerged from a crack in the floor behind one of the Chunin proctors who stood watching over the genin, a clipboard in his hand. The sliver of chakra coalesced, not into a solid clone, but into an almost invisible sensor, a disembodied point of awareness. Through it, Naruto could see what the proctor saw. He could see the Jay Nin from the sand village using a third eye made of sand to read a paper 2 rows away. He could see an Aburame using his insects to gather answers. He could see a dozen different, ingenious methods of cheating. And he could see the proctors, diligently marking down every genin who was caught. He didn't copy any answers. That was still too risky. Instead, he observed the pattern. He watched the students who were writing with confidence, the ones whose body language screamed certainty. He watched the ones the proctors weren't looking at, the ones who were clearly skilled enough to hide their methods. He cross-referenced their answers, analyzed the statistical probability of each choice, and built a mental map of the most likely correct responses. He wasn't stealing answers, he was performing a meta-analysis of the entire intelligence network in the room. He picked up his pencil and began to fill in his sheet, his movements calm and deliberate. When the time came for the 10th question, Ibiki's true test began. He laid out a brutal choice. They could choose not to answer, and their entire team would fail. Or they could choose to answer, and if they got it wrong, they would be barred from ever taking the Chunin exams again. It was a test of nerve, a psychological attack designed to weed out those who would crack under pressure. People began to quit, their resolve shattered. Naruto watched them go, his expression unreadable. This was the final filter. Would you risk everything on your own ability, and the ability of your team? He didn't hesitate. He didn't raise his hand. He sat in silence, his will an unshakable fortress. He had already passed his own test. This was merely a formality. When Ibiki finally declared that all who remained had passed, the true test haven't been their courage to stay, a triumphant cheer went up. Naruto simply put his pencil down. The mission was complete. As they were being dismissed, a Chunin proctor approached Ibiki, handing him a test paper. "Sir, you should see this. It's Uzumaki's." Ibiki took the paper. His scarred eyebrows rose. Every single answer, 1 through 9, was perfectly, flawlessly correct. He looked across the room at the blonde-haired boy who was walking out without a backward glance. The file said dead last. The paper said genius. Another piece of the puzzle that was Naruto Uzumaki clicked into a place that made no sense at all. The forest of death was a place of primal fear, and it felt like home. As the proctor, Enko Mitarashi, explained the rules of the second exam, a 5-day survival test to acquire matching heaven or earth scroll and reach the tower in the center, Naruto was already mapping the terrain in his mind. He could feel the life within the forest, the predators, the prey, the ancient, slumbering power of the place itself. His team was a mess. Sakura was terrified, her face pale. Sasuke was vibrating with a tense, aggressive energy, his eyes scanning the other teams, sizing them up, hungry for a fight. "All right," Naruto said, his voice low and commanding as they waited for the signal to start. New command structure. For the duration of this exercise, I am the team leader. My orders are absolute. Sakura, you are communications and medical. You will hold our scroll. Your priority is self-preservation and observation. Sasuke, you are our primary offensive weapon. You will engage only on my signal. I will be point and recon. We move fast, we stay silent, and we engage only when the probability of success is in our favor. Acknowledge. Who the hell made you leader? Sasuke snarled. I did, Naruto replied, his blue eyes turning to ice. On the bridge, your recklessness almost got you killed. In this forest, it will get us all killed. You are a weapon, a powerful one, but a weapon does not decide when and where to strike. The soldier wielding it does. You will follow my orders, or you will be a liability I will be forced to neutralize. Acknowledge. The sheer, cold authority in his voice was a physical force. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a statement of fact. Sasuke stared, his Sharingan flaring, a furious retort on his lips. But he couldn't say it. Because he knew, deep down, that Naruto was right. He had been reckless. And he knew, from the chilling lack of emotion in Naruto's eyes, that the threat to neutralize him was not a bluff. Gritting his teeth so hard his jaw ached, he gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod. Good, Naruto said. Let's move. The gates opened, and Team 7 plunged into the forest. Naruto led them in a pattern that was not quite random, not quite straight. He was moving them along the path of least resistance, following the natural contours of the forest's energy, avoiding the territories of the largest predators. Hours passed. The oppressive humidity and the constant threat of attack wore on them. Then, Naruto stopped. He held up a single fist, the signal to halt. What is it? Sakura whispered. Naruto didn't answer. He tilted his head, listening. The forest had gone silent. The insects, the birds, the rustle of small animals, it had all ceased. A predator was near, a very large one, and then he felt it. The serpent. It was here. The cold, ancient presence from the village. It was moving towards them with a terrifying, slithering speed. This was not a random encounter. They were being hunted. Enemy contact. Imminent, Naruto said, his voice dropping to a battlefield whisper. High-level threat. Sasuke, Sakura, defensive formation around me. Now, a gust of wind, heavy and foul, ripped through the clearing. A figure landed before them. It was a grass nin, tall and unnaturally pale, with golden eyes slitted like a snake's and a long, prehensile tongue that flickered out to taste the air. Killing intent rolling off this person was a physical pressure, a suffocating wave of pure malice that made Zabuza's feel like a child's tantrum. Well, the grass nin hissed, its voice a dry, sibilant rasp. What delicious little morsels have I found? Its gaze lingered on Sasuke, a hungry, possessive look in its golden eyes. An Uchiha, it's been so long since I've seen those beautiful eyes in person. Sasuke stepped forward, his pride overriding Naruto's command. I don't know who you are, but you've picked the wrong prey. He activated his Sharingan, its red glow a stark contrast to the forest's gloom. The grass nin just smiled, a wide, unsettling grin. Oh, I think I've picked the perfect prey. It moved. It wasn't a flicker of speed like Haku. It was a horrifying, unnatural contortion of the body. Its neck elongating, its head striking forward like a viper. Sasuke, for all his Sharingan-enhanced perception, was completely unprepared for a physiology that defied human limits. He was thrown back, a string of kunai with an explosive tag attached pinned to his shoulder. The tag ignited. Naruto was already there, ripping the kunai from Sasuke's jacket and hurling it away just as it detonated. The blast scorching his arm. Stay in formation, Naruto roared, his voice cracking like a whip. But it was too late. The grass nin was upon them, a whirlwind of snakes and impossible movements. Sakura was paralyzed by the sheer, unadulterated terror of its presence. Sasuke, enraged and humiliated, charged again, this time with a fireball jutsu. The grass nin swallowed it whole, its throat distending, and then spat it back, bigger and hotter. Sasuke was utterly, hopelessly outmatched. The serpent toyed with him, its every move a lesson in the vast, terrifying chasm between a gifted child and an ancient monster. It broke his arm, then his leg, systematically dismantling the proud Uchiha with a sadistic, clinical precision. Finally, it held the broken, gasping Sasuke up by his hair. Such wonderful hatred, it hissed, its long tongue flicking out to lick a smear of blood from Sasuke's cheek. Such potential. You need a push, a gift, to unlock that beautiful power. The grass nin's neck elongated again, its mouth opening impossibly wide as it lunged forward to bite Sasuke's neck. And in that moment, Naruto acted. He did not erupt in a cloak of red chakra. This was not the blind, protective rage of the bridge. This was a cold, calculated decision. This thing, this serpent, was not just an enemy shinobi. It was one of them. One of the moths drawn to his light. A player in the greater war. And it was attempting to corrupt one of his assets. Unacceptable. A low hum filled the air, the sound of a great forge igniting. The coppery, blood-colored Ra of his divine heritage flared around him, not as a raging storm, but as a perfectly controlled, razor-thin shell of power. His eyes did not become slitted and demonic. They bled from blue to the solid, molten gold of a god of war. Burning with an ancient, terrifying light, he moved, his speed not just enhanced by chakra, but by a power that bent the rules of physics. He appeared at the serpent's side, his fist drawn back. The serpent's golden eyes widened in genuine shock. It had been so focused on its Uchiha prize it had all but ignored the Jinchuriki. It had sensed the fox, but this was something else entirely. This was not the chakra of a beast. It was the ichor of the divine. Naruto's punch was not a wild swing. It was a perfect, textbook strike, every ounce of his power, both mortal and divine, focused into the single point of his knuckles. He aimed for the serpent's floating ribs, a known vulnerability in any humanoid anatomy. The impact was a dull, wet thud that sound dead like a side of beef being hit with a sledgehammer. The serpent let out a strangled, inhuman shriek as its ribs shattered inward, puncturing a lung. It dropped Sasuke, its body contorting in pain. "What are you?" It gasped, its golden eyes filled not with malice, but with a hungry, feverish curiosity. "Your opponent," Naruto said, his voice a low, resonant baritone, an echo of the battlefield commander he was born to be. He pressed the attack. It was not a brawl. It was an execution. Every move was precise, every strike aimed at a nerve cluster, a joint, a vital organ. He was fighting, with a knowledge of combat that was etched into his very soul. He didn't have the serpent's bizarre abilities, but he had something far more dangerous, a perfect, innate understanding of the art of war. The serpent, for all its power, found itself on the defensive. It was like fighting a force of nature, a living embodiment of conflict. It was exhilarating. It was terrifying. With a final, desperate move, the serpent's body seemed to melt, its skin sloughing off to reveal a new, paler form underneath as it shed the damage like a snake shedding its skin. It retreated, its movements still impossibly fast. "You are a fascinating creature, little Godeling," it hissed from the safety of the trees, its disguise as a grass nin now completely gone, revealing the true, snake-like face of Orochimaru. "The Uchiha is a lovely vessel. But you are a power unto yourself. The world is older than your village. I wonder which of us will devour it first." And with a final, chilling laugh, Orochimaru vanished. Naruto stood over the unconscious, broken form of Sasuke, his golden eyes slowly fading back to blue, the coppery aura receding into his skin. He looked at the mark on Sasuke's neck, a black, three-tomo pattern that pulsed with a malevolent, corrupting energy. The serpent's gift. He looked at Sakura, who was huddled at the base of a tree, shaking uncontrollably. His team was broken, the mission was compromised, and the divine war he had been warned of was no longer a distant threat. It had found him, it had marked his teammate, and it had looked him in the eye. The Chunin exams were no longer a test. They were the first battle. And he had just met the enemy. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Weight of Command. The echo of Orochimaru's laughter clung to the humid air long after he was gone. A venom that poisoned the silence. For a long moment, no one moved. Sakura was a statue of terror, her mind replaying the impossible, horrifying violence she had just witnessed. Sasuke lay in a broken heap, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps, the black tomo on his neck a profane mockery of his clan's sacred symbol. Then, Naruto moved. The last vestiges of the golden, divine light receded from his eyes, leaving behind the hard, flat blue of a winter sky. The battlefield hum in his blood quieted, replaced by the cold, clear logic of a commander in the aftermath of a catastrophic engagement. There was no panic. There was only the mission. Objective 1. Triage. He knelt beside Sasuke, his fingers expertly finding the carotid artery. The pulse was weak, thready. The arm and leg were broken. Clean fractures from the look of it, but the real damage was the mark. He could feel the chakra emanating from it, a dark, parasitic thing that was already sinking its tendrils into Sasuke's own network. Rewriting it, corrupting it. Sakura, he said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the fog of her fear like a shard of glass. She flinched, her wide, terrified eyes finally focusing on him. She saw not the boy she knew, not the monster of the bridge, but a figure of absolute, unnerving authority. Report, he commanded. Your status, injuries, and no, she stammered, her voice a thin, reedy thing. I'm okay. Incorrect, Naruto stated, his gaze unsparing. You are in a state of psychological shock. Your combat effectiveness is 0. You are a liability. That changes now. He gestured to Sasuke's still form. He has 2 broken limbs, probable internal bleeding, and a high-level poison or curse of unknown properties has been applied directly to his primary chakra network. He is dying. The blunt, clinical assessment was a physical blow. Sakura gasped, a sob catching in her throat. I cannot treat him and secure a perimeter simultaneously, Naruto continued. His voice relentless. You are the team medic. Your chakra control is the most precise. You will stabilize him. That is an order. He wasn't asking. He wasn't comforting. He was assigning a duty. He was giving her a mission, a focal point in the swirling chaos of her terror. For a moment, she just stared, trembling. Then, the ingrained discipline of her academy training, and the deep, desperate well of her affection for Sasuke, broke through the paralysis. What do I do? She whispered, crawling closer. Set the bones. Create a splint. Use your chakra to cool his fever. Focus. Your feelings are a luxury we cannot afford. The mission is his survival. Execute. He turned away from her, trusting that the order, the purpose, would be the lifeline she needed to herself from the drowning depths of her fear. He was right. Sakura took a shuddering breath, her hands shaking, and placed them on Sasuke's forehead. The skin was burning hot. She closed her eyes, and a faint, green glow enveloped her palms. It was weak, trembling, but it was there. She had found her purpose. Objective 2. Secure the perimeter. Naruto hefted Sasuke's unconscious body over his shoulder. The Uchiha was lighter than he expected, a fragile weight. We're moving, he said to Sakura. Stay close. Be my eyes to the rear. He led them deeper into the forest, his senses extended. A living radar sweeping the oppressive gloom. He found what he was looking for within 10 minutes. A shallow cave, hidden behind a curtain of thick, hanging vines at the base of a massive, ancient tree. It was defensible, concealed, and dry. He laid Sasuke down gently inside the cave, then turned back to the entrance. No fire. It'll draw attention. We rest here until he's stable or we're compromised. He bit his thumb and flew through a series of hand seals. Shadow clone jutsu. Not 1,000, not 100, just 10. They flickered into existence, perfect, silent copies. 5 of you, perimeter patrol, 1 kilometer radius. Report any and all contacts. 5 of you, trap deployment. Use what's in my pack. Standard anti-personnel patterns. Go. The clones dispersed without a word, melting into the forest. Naruto was now the commander of a small, effective intelligence and defense network. He stood at the mouth of the cave, a silent sentinel, his gaze fixed on the menacing, whispering trees. Inside, the hours crawled by. Sasuke's condition worsened. He began to convulse, muttering feverishly. He cried out a name, once, in a moment of pained clarity. Itachi. The curse mark on his neck pulsed with a faint, purple light, seeming to feed on his pain. Sakura worked tirelessly. She tore strips from her own clothing to make bandages, found sturdy branches for splints, and Nev stopped pouring her own chakra into him, a cool, steady stream that fought a losing battle against the raging fire of the curse. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now overlaid with a fierce, desperate resolve. Naruto had given her a command, and she would not fail. She was a shinobi of the leaf. And this was her mission. The attack came on the second day. Naruto was in a state of low-level meditation, conserving his energy while his clones patrolled, when one of them dispelled. The feedback was instantaneous. A flood of information, a visual of 3 shinobi moving through the trees with a quiet, arrogant confidence. Their headbands bore the symbol of the village hidden in the sound. Orochimaru's pawns, Naruto's mind supplied with cold certainty. Their objective would be Sasuke. He melted back into the shadows of the cave. Contact, he whispered. 3 hostiles, approaching from the east. Sound Nin. Sakura's head snapped up, her face pale with exhaustion and renewed fear. She looked at Sasuke, who was still lost in his fevered nightmares. They were trapped. What do we do? She asked, her voice trembling. You will stay here, Naruto said, his voice a low, dangerous hum. You will continue to protect Sasuke. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, you do not leave this cave. That is your post. Before she could protest, he was gone. A flicker of motion that dissolved into the forest's gloom. Dosu, Zaku, and Kin moved with the lazy confidence of predators who knew the location of their prey. They followed the faint trail of disturbed leaves. The scent of medicinal herbs Sakura had gathered, the subtle traces that a genin team leaves behind. This is the place, Dosu said, his bandaged face turning towards the vine-covered cave. His arm, covered by a massive, sound-amplifying gauntlet, twitched in anticipation. Lord Orochimaru wants to see how his little gift is progressing. Let's give it a wake-up call. Zaku, a boy with spiky black hair and air vents in his palms, grinned. I'll just blast the whole cave open. No, you fool, Dosu hissed. The Uchiha is the prize, not the target. We just need to apply a little pressure. He took a step forward, and froze. A single kunai was embedded in the tree trunk just beside his head, a paper tag fluttering from its ring. It hadn't been there a second ago. So, a voice said, seemingly coming from all directions at once. You're the Serpent's errand boys. 10 Narutos dropped from the canopy, surrounding them. Another 10 rose from the undergrowth, their faces as cold and hard as stone masks. They formed a perfect, inescapable circle. Zaku laughed, a harsh, grating sound. A bunch of shadow clones. Is this supposed to scare us? He thrust his palms forward. Decapitating airwaves. A blast of pressurized air and sound shot forward, tearing through 3 of the clones, which vanished in puffs of smoke. But for every one that vanished, 2 more aimed to step from the shadows to take its place. We are not here to scare you, the voice, now coming from a Naruto standing directly behind Dosu, said. We are here to deliver a message. Dosu spun around, his gauntlet raised. But the clone was already gone. This wasn't a fight, it was a shell game. Our master is not a patient man, Kin, the female member of the team, said, pulling a senbon from her pouch. Give us the Uchiha. The Uchiha is a compromised asset under my protection, the real Naruto said, stepping out from behind the trunk of the massive tree that housed the cave. The clones did not vanish. They stood their ground, a silent, disciplined army. You are trespassing in my kill zone. You have made a tactical error. Dosu studied him. There was no fear in the boy's eyes. No anger. Just a cold, unwavering focus that was more unsettling than any threat. He saw the scorched sleeve on the boy's arm, the exhaustion in his posture, but he also felt the immense discipline. Ed Chakra holding 100 solid clones in existence without any visible strain. You're protecting a rival, Dosu sneered, trying to find a psychological weakness. Lord Orochimaru has given him a gift of power. You should let him have it. The gift is a leash, Naruto stated flatly. Your master seeks to control him, to turn him into a tool. I do not allow my weapons to be taken by the enemy. The possessive, proprietary way he said my weapons sent a chill down Dosu's spine. This wasn't loyalty, it was ownership. Then we will take him by force, Zaku boasted, preparing another attack. You will not, Naruto said. He raised a single hand. In perfect unison, all 100 clones drew a kunai. The sound of 100 blades being drawn at once was a single, sharp shing that cut the air. You are 3 shinobi in a prepared kill box, surrounded by a superior force. Your defeat is a statistical certainty. Your options are twofold. You can be annihilated, or you can withdraw. He took a step forward, his blue eyes locking onto Dosu's. However, my mission objective is to acquire a Heaven Scroll. You carry a Heaven Scroll. I am prepared to offer a third option, a tactical exchange. You will give me your scroll. In return, I will allow you to leave this forest alive. You may report to your master that the Uchiha is progressing as expected. You complete your mission of observation. I complete mine of acquisition, and we all conserve our strength for a more strategically important battle. This is the most efficient outcome for all parties. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a strategic briefing, delivered with the cold logic of a general offering terms of surrender. Dosu stared, his mind racing. This kid, he wasn't thinking like a genin. He was thinking like a cage. He had assessed the situation, calculated the probabilities, and offered a solution that was brutally pragmatic. He was right. A fight here was pointless. Their mission was to test Sasuke, not to die fighting his bizarrely competent teammate. And if we refuse, Dosu challenged, a final test of will. Naruto's eyes hardened. Then the statistical probability of your survival drops to 0. And I will take the scroll from your corpses. There was no doubt in his voice. It was a promise. Dosu looked at his teammates. He looked at the circle of emotionless, identical faces. He looked at the boy who stood at the center of it all, a commander who had turned a simple bluff into an overwhelming display of tactical dominance. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a scroll. He tossed it onto the ground between them. You're an interesting one, Naruto Uzumaki, Dosu said, a new, grudging respect in his voice. Lord Orochimaru will be very pleased to hear about you. Naruto gestured with his head. The circle of clones opened a single path. Go. The sound Nin didn't need to be told twice. They vanished into the trees, leaving the scroll lying in the dirt. The clones dissolved, their chakra flowing back into Naruto. He swayed, the strain of maintaining the jutsu while exhausted finally hitting him. He picked up the Heaven Scroll, then turned and walked back into the cave. Sakura was standing at the entrance, a kunai clutched in her white-knuckled grip, her body trembling but her feet planted, ready to fight, to die, to obey her last order. She had heard everything. Naruto walked past her and knelt beside Sasuke again. He unrolled their own Earth Scroll and placed the new Heaven Scroll beside it. Mission objective complete, he said, his voice flat with exhaustion. He looked at Sakura, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't warmth. It was the faint, grudging respect a commander gives a soldier who has held the line. You did well, Sakura. You held your post. Sakura stared at him, then at the 2 scrolls, then at the still unconscious boy she had protected. She had been terrified. She had been useless. And then, she hadn't been. She had stood her ground. She had followed her orders. She had been a shinobi. A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. It wasn't a tear of fear, or of sadness. It was a tear of grim, painful pride. At that moment, Sasuke groaned. His eyes fluttered open. They were no longer black. They were the burning, crimson red of the Sharingan, and they were fixed on Naruto. He had been semi-conscious through the entire ordeal. He had heard the confrontation. He had heard Naruto call him a compromised asset. He had heard him call him his weapon. The curse mark on his neck burned with a cold fire. He had been broken, gifted, and then defended like an object. The weight of the humiliation, the debt, and the rage was a physical thing, and it was going to consume him. The sun began to set, its last rays filtering through the vines, painting the cave in shades of blood and shadow. They had survived. They had won. But the team was more broken than ever. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Tower and the Tally. The silence in the cave was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. It was composed of Sakura's exhausted, fearful breaths, the faint, fever ish rustle of Sasuke on the makeshift pallet, and the granite stillness of Naruto, who had not moved from his position by the entrance. The Heaven Scroll lay beside its Earth counterpart, a victory that felt as hollow and cold as a tomb. Sasuke's eyes were open. The crimson of the Sharingan had faded, leaving behind black pupils in a field of white, but the gaze they held was more intense than any bloodline limit. It was a look of pure, distilled venom, and it was aimed squarely at Naruto. My weapon, Sasuke rasped, each word a shard of glass in his throat. The curse mark on his neck throbbed, a dull, aching counterpoint to the sharp pain of his broken bones. Naruto turned his head, his profile framed by the pale light filtering through the vines. You are a member of this team. The team is a combat unit. Every member is a weapon in the commander's arsenal. Do not mistake a tactical designation for a personal insult. You let me break, Sasuke hissed, trying to push himself up and failing. A grunt of pain and frustration escaping his lips. You stood back and let that thing take me apart. I did, Naruto confirmed, his voice devoid of apology. His objective was to test and mark you. My objective was to assess his capabilities. A direct confrontation from the start would have revealed my own strength prematurely and risked your immediate death. By allowing the engagement to proceed, I gathered critical intelligence and was able to intervene at the optimal moment to ensure your survival. Sakura stared, horrified. He was describing it like a chess match, where Sasuke had been a pawn. Deliberately sacrificed to draw out the enemy queen. You sacrificed me, Sasuke whispered, the rage in his voice so profound it was almost quiet. I risked you, Naruto corrected, his gaze unwavering. A commander who is unwilling to risk his soldiers is a commander who will lose the war. You were wounded. You were not lost. The asset was damaged, but it is recoverable. The cold, brutal pragmatism was worse than any malice. Sasuke fell back, a choked, laugh-like sound escaping his lips. He was an asset, a weapon, an object. He had dedicated his life to avenging the family that had been slaughtered for their power, and now his own power had made him a prize to be marked, and a tool to be wielded by the one person he despised above all others. The irony was a poiso, far more potent than Orochimaru's curse. We move in 1 hour, Naruto announced, turning his attention back to the forest. Sakura, get him ready for transport. The tower is our objective. We are behind schedule. There were no more arguments. There was nothing left to say. The chasm between them was no longer a simple fissure of rivalry, it was a canyon carved by the cold, hard truths of the battlefield. And Naruto was standing alone on the far side. The journey to the tower was a special kind of hell. Naruto fashioned a crude but effective travois from branches and vines and strapped Sasuke to it. He took the lead, pulling the dead weight of his teammate through the dense, grasping undergrowth. The effort was immense, even for him. Every step was a strain, every meter gained a small, grueling victory. Sakura walked beside the travois, her hands glowing with a faint green light as she continuously channeled her chakra into Sasuke, trying to keep the fever from consuming him and the pain from waking him. Her own reserves were dangerously low, her body screaming with exhaustion, but she did not stop. Naruto's words in the cave had been a brutal baptism of fire. He had shown her the cold, unforgiving calculus of their world, and in doing so, had burned away the last of her childish illusions. She was not a fangirl. She was a medic nin on a live battlefield, and her patient's life was her only mission. They moved in silence, a broken, desperate procession. The forest watched them, its ancient, unseen eyes following their painful progress. The other teams were out there, hunting, fighting, dying. But Team 7 was in a world of its own, a bubble of shared misery. On the afternoon of the 4th day, with the oppressive spire of the central tower just visible through the canopy, the forest decided it was not yet finished with them. Naruto stopped, his head tilting. The air had changed, a subtle shift in pressure. The scent of ozone and wet rain where there was no cloud. Genjutsu, he breathed, his voice a low warning. The world around them dissolved. The trees warped and twisted into leering, human-like shapes. The ground beneath their feet became a swamp of grasping, shadowy hands. A dozen enemy shinobi seemed to flicker into existence around them, their faces grinning masks of death. Sakura cried out, stumbling back. Sasuke, strapped to the travois, began to struggle, his curse mark flaring with a dark, angry energy in response to the hostile chakra. It's not real. Naruto's voice cut through the illusion, a blade of pure command. Sakura, focus on my chakra. Anchor yourself. Break it. Sakura, her mind reeling, squeezed her eyes shut. She tried to find Naruto's signature, that calm, immense sea of power, but the illusory chakra was a confusing, chaotic storm. The phantoms were closing in, their hands reaching for her, for Sasuke. "Hold your post," a voice echoed in her mind. Naruto's voice. "You were the team medic." Her eyes snapped open. The terror was still there. But beneath it was the hard, sharp edge of duty. She looked at Sasuke, at his pained, unconscious face. He was her responsibility, her post. "Release," she screamed, the word a raw, desperate prayer. She flared her own chakra, a single, sharp pulse of controlled energy. The illusion shattered. The grasping hands became roots, the twisted trees returned to their normal shape. The dozen phantoms resolved into 3 figures standing before them, their headbands bearing the symbol of the hidden Rain Village. "Impressive," the leader of the Rain Nin said, a smirk on his face. "Most genin fall for that completely." Naruto did not relax. He dropped the travois, placing himself between the enemy and his wounded team. "State your objective," he demanded. "Isn't it obvious?" The Rain Nin chuckled. "Your scroll." Naruto's eyes narrowed. He could feel it, a subtle, nagging dissonance. This was wrong. The genjutsu had been a screening tactic. This frontal assault was too simple, too obvious. He created 20 shadow clones in a silent, instantaneous explosion of force. They charged, a wave of orange and black. The Rain Nin met them, and the clearing erupted into a chaotic melee. But Naruto's eyes weren't on the fight. They were on the ground. He saw the subtle disturbance in the dirt behind him. He saw the faint shimmer in the air near the travois. Another illusion. The 3 Rain Nin in front were a diversion. Clones. The real ones were using a camouflage jutsu, circling around to take out the primary target, the injured Sasuke. "Sakura, behind you," Naruto yelled. Sakura spun around just as a Rain Nin materialized from the air, a kunai flashing towards Sasuke's throat. There was no time to think. She threw herself over Sasuke's body, a human shield, her arms covering her head. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the cold steel. The blow never came. She opened her eyes to see Sasuke, somehow free of his bindings, with one good arm propped up. His hand catching the enemy's wrist. His eyes were blazing, the Sharingan and the curse mark a terrifying, unholy union. A black, flame-like pattern was spreading across the left side of his body. His chakra a maelstrom of Uchiha pride and Orochimaru's venom. "Don't touch them," Sasuke snarled, his voice a guttural growl that was not entirely his own. With a surge of unnatural strength, he twisted the Rain Nin's arm, shattering the bone with a sickening crack. The other 2 real Rain Nin appeared, moving to support their comrade. But they were too late. The original Naruto was there. Not the clones, but the real one. He moved with a speed that seemed to defy the very air, his face a mask of cold, lethal fury. The sight of his team being brought to the brink, of his carefully laid plans being threatened, had finally stoked the forge in his blood. He did not engage them in a ninja battle. He dismantled them. A single, precise strike to the first one's throat. A brutal, joint-snapping lock on the second. He moved through them not like a shinobi, but like a god of battle, every movement a perfect, brutal poem of violence. In seconds, it was over. The Rain Nin were a broken, unconscious heap on the forest floor. The clones vanished. Silence returned. Naruto stood over the defeated enemy, his chest heaving, the coppery battle aura a faint shimmer around his fists. He turned to look at his team. Sakura was staring at Sasuke, her face a mixture of shock and terror. Sasuke was glaring at Naruto, his body still covered in the curse mark's black flames, his Sharingan spinning wildly. He was on his feet, standing on a broken leg, his body trembling with a power that was actively devouring him. "I didn't need you," Sasuke spat, the words a desperate, prideful lie. He took a step, and his leg buckled. He would have fallen, but Naruto was there, catching him before he hit the ground. "No," Naruto said, his voice surprisingly quiet. "You didn't." He looked at Sakura, who had thrown herself in the path of a killing blow. He looked at Sasuke, who had woken from a near coma to defend his teammate. "You acted as a unit." He slung Sasuke's good arm over his shoulder, taking his weight. The curse mark receded, the black flames sinking back into the tomo on his neck, leaving Sasuke panting and pale. "Let's go," Naruto said. "The mission isn't over." He left the Rain Nin and their two scrolls where they lay. They had their own. That was all that mattered. They limped the final kilometer to the tower, a broken, bleeding, but strangely united team. The central tower was a stark, brutalist structure that rose from the heart of the forest like a tombstone. The entrance led into a massive, circular chamber. The air was cool and still, a shocking contrast to the humid chaos outside. They were not the first to arrive. The three Sand siblings stood in a far corner, radiating an aura of quiet menace. The girl, Tamari, held a massive fan. The boy with the puppet on his back, Konkuro, watched them with a calculating smirk. And the red-haired one, Gaara, stood with his arms crossed, his dead, sea-green eyes fixing on them. He wasn't looking at Naruto or Sakura. He was staring at Sasuke, at the faint, lingering traces of Orochimaru's chakra. A flicker of something that might have been recognition, or perhaps a predator's interest in a rival, crossed his face. Team Guy was there as well. The boisterous Rock Lee, the stoic Neji Hyuga, and the weapons master Tenten. Neji's pale, lavender eyes, the Byakugan, swept over them, his gaze lingering for a moment on Sasuke's injuries and the faint, chaotic energy of Naruto's core. His lip curled in a faint sneer of disdain. Team 7 found an empty section of the wall and collapsed. The exam was over. They had survived. Sakura immediately went back to work on Sasuke, her healing chakra stronger, more confident now. Sasuke allowed it, too exhausted and in too much pain to protest. Naruto stood watch. He scanned the room, his gaze cataloging every team, every face. He felt the instability of Gaara, the arrogant power of Neji, the quiet competence of Shikamaru Nara's team, who had also just arrived. This was the next stage of the battlefield. These were the opponents. He felt a familiar presence and turned. Iruka-sensei stood there, a warm, relieved smile on his face. "You made it," Iruka said. His eyes filled with a pride that was almost painful to see. "All of you, I was so worried." His gaze fell on Sasuke's broken form, and his smile faltered. "What happened?" Before anyone could answer, Anko and a team of medics appeared. Her face was grim. "We found them," she said, her voice low and directed at Kakashi, who had just arrived with the other Jonin instructors. "The Grass Nin. Their faces. They were stolen." It was him. Kakashi's single eye widened. He knew instantly who he was. His gaze shot to his team, to the exhausted Sakura, the unconscious Sasuke, the unnervingly calm Naruto. He strode over, his usual laziness stripped away, revealing the sharp, focused edge of the Anbu captain he used to be. He saw the mark on Sasuke's neck. "Anko," he said, his voice a low, dangerous command. "Get the medics. Now, take him to a secure room." He knelt beside his student, his fingers gently brushing the cursed seal. He could feel the malignant power within it, a sleeping serpent waiting to strike. As the medics carefully lifted Sasuke onto a stretcher, Naruto felt his exhaustion finally claim him. He slid down the wall, his consciousness wavering. The stress of the past 5 days. The constant vigilance, the massive expenditure of chakra, the brief, terrifying touch of his divine power, it all came crashing down at once. His vision blurred. The stone room of the tower dissolved, replaced by a sight far grander, far more terrifying. He was looking at a tapestry. It was impossibly vast, stretching into an infinite, star-dusted darkness. Every thread was a life. Every color a different form of energy. He saw the brilliant, steady threads of normal humans. He saw the bright, complex threads of shinobi, pulsing with chakra. Then he saw his own. It was a thick, powerful cord. A braid of 3 distinct, vibrant colors. A fiery, demonic red that writhed with caged fury. A mortal, sunset orange, stubborn and resilient. And a brilliant, molten gold tea. Hat hummed with the boundless energy of war itself. He saw other threads that were not like the rest. A pale, chillingly white thread that felt of bone and moonlight, the Kagaya clan. A deep, prideful, indigo that shimmered with crimson flecks, the Uchiha. And then he saw it. A thread of venomous, sickly purple-black, thin but strong, weaving its way through the tapestry. It was the serpent's thread. Orochimaru. It wasn't just a single life, it was a contagion. Everywhere it touched, the other threads seemed to sicken, to darken, to twist into corrupted, unnatural patterns. He watched in horror, as it wrapped itself around Sasuke's indigo thread, injecting its poison, beginning the slow, terrible process of consumption. But the serpent's thread wasn't moving randomly. It was part of a larger pattern, a dark, intricate design being woven into the fabric of the mortal realm. And Naruto realized, with a sudden, chilling certainty that went beyond mere knowledge, that there was a weaver. A distant, calculating intelligence was guiding that venomous thread, with a purpose he could not yet comprehend. His brother, Phobos, had warned him of mobs drawn to his light. He had thought it was a personal threat. He was wrong. Orochimaru wasn't just after him, or after Sasuke. He was an agent of a greater, darker power. One of the players in the Eternal War. And his opening move was being made right here, in this small village. In this simple shinobi exam. Naruto's eyes snapped open. Kakashi was kneeling in front of him, his hand on his shoulder. Naruto, are you with me? Kakashi's voice was tight with a worry that went far beyond a student's exhaustion. Naruto looked at his sensei, his young face suddenly ancient, his eyes holding the weight of the terrible, cosmic secret he had just glimpsed. It's a pattern, Naruto whispered, his voice hoarse. He's not just a snake. He's a thread, and something is weaving. Kakashi stared, utterly baffled by the cryptic statement. He had come to talk about the curse mark, about Orochimaru. He was prepared for trauma, for anger, for a Jinchuriki's instability. He was not prepared for a prophecy. We'll talk later, Kakashi said, his mind reeling. First, we deal with the poison that's in front of us. He stood up, looking in the direction the medics had taken Sasuke. A dark resolve settled on his face. He knew what he had to do. He would seal the curse. He would cauterize the wound. He would protect his student, his team, his village. But as he looked back at the boy sitting against the wall, the boy who spoke of weavers and tapestries, he was struck by a terrifying, humbling thought. He was just a shinobi, trying to patch a single, torn thread, while one of his students was already watching the entire universe unravel. Chapter 10 End.